Okay, please take your seats. Welcome to the 3:37 study session of the Newport Beach City Council. We have a couple of items on our agenda this afternoon. And I've lost my study session agenda. I guess roll call, please.
The record will reflect that all, council members Ann Curry and Councilmember Webb are absent at the moment.
Okay. Clarification of items on the consent calendar. Councilwoman Gardner.
Yes, number 9. I just, since we had this sand replenishment issue a few years ago, I really want to emphasize the importance of notification of oceanfront people and that whole area. It's on there, but I don't want us to forget it.
Yes. Councilwoman Daigle.
None.
Mayor Pro Tem Selich.
I have none.
And I have none. Our first item of business will be project management delivery methods for the OASIS project. And I believe we have a staff report on that.
We certainly do, Mr. Mayor, and there was a kind of a lengthy written staff report, but since we are short of time, I've asked Steve Vadum to kind of highlight the project manager at risk method of delivery, since that was what we talked about at the City Council Finance Committee about a month ago, and there was enough interest in order to bring that same discussion to the City Council for your feedback.
Okay.
And if the mayor would allow me, I'd like to first start off with, I'd like to introduce to you our new Deputy Public Works Director and City Engineer, Dave Webb. Dave has been with the City of Huntington Beach, and we're pleased to have him on our team. He has over 20 years' experience in public works, and being a similar city, he's going to be a real help. One of the big focuses that Dave's going to have is capital program delivery, and so and this is kind of what this is all about, so I just wanted to kind of point him out. Dave, why don't you go up to the podium and say hi real quick?
God, I can't believe we're going to have another Webb back in the Public Works Department, huh?
Hi, real quick.
In no relation to Don.
Don's been trying to prove that for years. But
You know, he's a genealogy guy, and somehow he'll hook you back, I don't know, Adam and Eve or something.
back on the Mayflower or something.
Yeah.
He has him on
Thank you, and
probation
I'm
right now.
looking forward to being with you and working with you.
Very good. Thanks for joining our team.
Okay, as Homer said, thank you. As Homer says, I have a little quick presentation here, and a lot of the information's in the staff report, so we can go over anything that's in there if you'd like. But I'll just kind of whip through it fairly quickly because I know you've got a lot of things today. What I see this is, it says Chapter 1 on the presentation because what I want you to know is that this is going to be the first of many, hopefully many presentations. We're going to be looking at our whole capital improvement program delivery. Not only the methods, but all of our processes, all of the things that we do to deliver projects to see if there are better ways to deliver our projects in the way of cost, schedule, and quality. And again, the focus is cost, schedule, and quality. And obviously, we want to, do projects for less than the current marketplace. We want to streamline our processes, permitting, construction, design, the whole bit. And of course, we want to keep that level of quality that the citizens and our community is used to. One of the issues, the cost issues, of course, we have rising construction costs. And I got a little quote here from the Engineering News Record, who pretty much tracks a lot of the building costs. They have what they call a building cost index. And in the last year, that's been up about 2.6, which is actually lower than it had been in the past. In fact, in the last month, it's fairly flat. What we think is just an anomaly before things start going up again. Labor increased 4.5%. Materials, cement, 6.3% up. Steel's a little less, but 1.7 up. And lumber's down by 7%. Unfortunately, a lot of the construction that we do, though, we don't really use a lot of lumber, so that doesn't help us that much. Also, there's a lot of competition for qualified contractors now. ENR also does kind of an outlook every year, and they're saying that they think institutional buildings such as our projects will be rising in dollar volume by about 4%. The school construction is expected to start going again. It had leveled off a little bit. And, of course, public works projects continue. What is going down is some of the commercial and multifamily residential, which may help us out a little bit. Of course, also we have regulations and modern operational standards. The new building and fire codes are going to affect us, coastal when needed. water quality, and then how we build things. Like, for instance, a fire station now, we have to design fire stations with different standards for dual gender. We have technology changes, things that make it so our buildings are different now. We also want to incorporate the green building costs. As some of you know, the LEED costs, the basic LEED construction can be relatively not increase a lot, but as you kind of go up the scale and the more, when you get to like platinum, you could be up to, say, 25% in your building costs. We also, because we're in closed quarters in a lot of our areas and we are built out, we do have a lot of mitigation costs. Just recently in the Newport Coast project, we had to add additional walls and additional landscaping in order to mitigate issues from the neighbors. And then there's cost creep, which always seems to happen. If anybody's ever done their own remodel project, you know that there's always the, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this, or as long as we're here, why don't we add this? And so that tends to happen quite a bit as we get deeper into the project designs. This is this quick little graph that shows you how, over the years, the building index has always gone up, with relatively few exceptions. So it's not liable to go down in the future. So it's never going to be cheaper than it is right now. And then schedule issues. We have a lot of processes, and I won't go through them all, but you can see them up there, everything from our selection process, the charter, the CEQA, permits. There's a lot of rules that we have to abide by. And then we have the linear project delivery method, and I won't go through that, but it's kind of a one step after the other type process. We also have other issues where we have a certain amount of capacity in the city staff. There's a limited availability of contract help outside consultants. And there's also a lot of, as I said, a lot of competition for contractors and subcontractors. Materials also are hard to get. Sometimes we have some availability issues with steel and concrete as well as asphalt. And of course the schedule creep where things kind of get delayed by various whatever reasons and errors and omissions. And the important third leg of this is the quality issues. We want to make sure that we're hiring quality people to do our work. We have a process in place that we are doing. We're very focused in outreach, just as Councilwoman Gardner mentioned on the beach project. We got to make sure we involve our stakeholders, public officials, and all of the folks that are affected by these projects. And we really want to focus on constructability reviews and value engineering to make sure we have quality projects. And another thing that we've been doing that we started with the library, the Mariners Library project, is we're pre-qualifying all of our major builder, constructor type contractors that ensure that we get only the top shelf of building construction contractors. So that brings us to the alternate delivery methods. Of course, we have our traditional design, bid, build. There's design, build, but that really doesn't work that well for us because it's kind of it's limited in competitive bidding. The bidding's up front, but you don't have a whole lot of control in the middle and what happens. So tonight we're going to focus a little bit on the program manager at risk, which is kind of a blend of our traditional method and our design build. And it involves a guaranteed maximum price, and it can help reduce our schedule and limit our costs and transfer of risk. The program manager at risk, this is the basic structure. You can see in the dotted line, there's a program manager at risk team that involves the architect and the construction manager, which is typically a major construction firm that provides all of those construction services. And then below it, you see there's trades. Well, all the various trades like plumbing and electrical are all bid out separately in various packages. Now you also see up there, there's an option to have a direct relationship between the architect and the city. So it doesn't necessarily have to be under the project manager. And I'll go into more of this as we kind of walk through the process. How it works is the key. The program manager is selected by a quality-based selection. That's per our state codes and also our city council policies. That involves the architect as well as the construction manager and construction oversight folks. That project manager, program manager, serves as our agent and manages the schematic design and design development process and specifications. And then at the point where our design is complete, the program manager develops a guaranteed maximum price based upon those designs and specifications. And then the city either accepts the GMP and enters into the contract with the program manager or rejects it. If they reject it, we can go to just a standard traditional project where we bid out the whole package as one. And then the program manager is paid a fixed fee to manage the final design and construction. There we go. The bid packages are also prepared, and they're prepared separately for each of the trades. As I said before, HVAC, plumbing, electrical, framing, flooring, what have you, foundations, grading, and then they bid those out. They're bid out competitively through the city. The city puts out the bids, the city clerk opens the bids, and the city council awards all of the bids.
What sort of input does he have on that process traditionally? Or he or she?
Well, I mean, as the project manager, the program manager, they're acting as our employee to manage the production of those bid packages. The city stays very involved in that process and making sure the specifications and the plans meet our needs.
But Councilwoman Gardner, most of the time, the subcontracts wouldn't be awarded by the city council.
That's fine.
This time, they're bid separately, as opposed to just a general contractor, bidding the whole job.
Yeah, typically, in this traditional method, we do just put it out. We'll get a lump sum number, and we don't really know what the sub-bids are. Only the contractor knows.
Are there different wage requirements if the city versus a subcontractor?
Oh, the wage requirements are the same with either process. It's strictly, it's just different that if there's smaller packages for each little trade. And then essentially, once we award the project, we assign those contracts to the program manager who's responsible for managing the project or managing each one of the subcontractors and getting all the work executed. And, of course, they manage the construction. And then any costs over the guaranteed maximum price are absorbed by the program manager. In other words, our costs are fixed, unless, of course, we make changes that are outside of that guaranteed maximum price.
If we didn't do the Bank-Based Science Center like a program manager at risk, but we did some elements to where all of the subcontracts were bid out separately, and that's why we kept coming back to the city council for award and then completion.
And then he's bonded or something, so that if what's
Yes,
the guarantee?
the whole project's bonded, yes. So there's a guarantee. The other, as Homer mentioned, the way we did it a little differently in the Back Bay Marine Science Center was that the risk involved was and there was also an additional incentive that if they kept prices down, they would share in any savings in the contingency money, which is different here. Because here, all the savings would go directly back to the city. The program manager at risk does not get any windfall if money is saved. All the money goes back to the city.
So what's the incentive to save?
I think one of the incentives would be that whoever would be the program manager at risk would think that if I do a good job and money comes back to the city, maybe they'll use me again on another project.
Yeah. And then also, when they give us their price, they get paid a flat fee. So they're not competing to getting that job. They're getting hired and they're getting paid a flat fee to manage that work. So they're making fee, and there's obviously some built-in profits in that fee.
What are the disadvantages to us to use this technique?
I think the disadvantages are that I think we're going to have, if we use this technique, we really have to stay involved and stay on top of it to make sure we're getting what we want out of the project. as far as the specifications. We would do that normally in any project, but I think in this, we have to really understand what we're getting, because once the price is locked in and guaranteed, any change that we make that's outside of that guaranteed price, we're going to have to pay for. Like, let's say if we decide we're going to do a standard linoleum floor, and then after the guaranteed maximum price is set, someone decides, gee, it would really be nice if we had slate floors there. We would have to pay for that increase. So the downside is we have to decide early what we want and lock into it as well.
Won't we have to pay for that increase anyway? I mean, we spec'd out in our
Yeah, we
bid
would.
package that we're putting linoleum floors, and all the bidders bid linoleum, and then we decided to change it to slate, we'd have to pay for that anyway.
Yeah, we would. But I guess it's if we want to lock in our price early on, especially for financing purposes, then we've kind of lost that advantage if we make a lot of changes after the GMP is set.
And Steve, I don't know if it's an advantage, but it certainly is a difference, and that is the way we have been doing projects. We hire the architect, and basically, staff and the user groups and the council work with the architect, and they come up with a bid package, and the project manager oversees that. Under this one, the architect works for the project manager at risk. So it's a collaborative effort, and a lot of communication takes place, at that level, maybe away from us. That doesn't mean that committees couldn't be set up and there couldn't be weekly reports or whatever, but it is a
Well,
different
where's the
relationship.
architect's fiduciary responsibility then? Is it to the program manager or to the city?
It can
If
be
he's
set
working
up.
for the program manager, it seems he has a different fiduciary responsibility than working for the city.
And also, in this case, we have an architect for Oasis. He's already working on it. It's not like when we did the City Hall project, and we were basically going with this type of a program where the program manager hired the architect, and they came to us with the design. I mean, we can go either way on it. It's just, my understanding is that if you get the at-risk program manager in earlier, he's going to somehow save us money, or that's their claim, is that?
Well, I think there's a lot of advantages to it, and I can go through a few of them, but.
With the, other projects in town, have we done any program manager at risk projects in town?
Not purely. We've done like a hybrid, as I mentioned, with the Back Bay Science Center, but that really wasn't a kind of a full program manager at risk project.
But I think there are situations like in Mariner's Library, maybe as an example, about some of the design issues, some of the HVAC issues that, in retrospect, if we had worked with a program manager early with the architect, we would have saved ourselves some problems that we ran into.
Well, why is that? The architect's not doing the right job? or-
Well, an architect typically is isolated from the contractor. When you hire the contractor and the construction manager and the program manager together, they can work together, and we can do constructability reviews even before the design is done. If an architect is approaching a certain problem with a solution that they've designed, they may not be aware of the recent changes in costs. There may be an easier, better way to do it. So if they're all working together, there's more constructability and value engineering going on from the very start if they're on board early.
Why couldn't the city hire a construction manager on a salary or fee basis to do the same thing? And
We could do that. We could easily do that. But having them all under one roof makes it so there's someone there to make sure they all work together. Otherwise, it becomes somewhat of an adversarial, where the architect is defending his design and the construction reviewer is attacking his design. So if they're all on the same team, they're going to be working cooperatively together, I think, is the only difference.
With the Oasis, it seems to me, I'm not remembering the contract because it's not in front of me, but one of the reasons that the fee was a little higher was that this architect was going to be much more involved through the process, and he had different responsibilities than might traditionally be the case.
Well, I think the reason, that it is true, but I think that's almost true for all of our projects because, unless it's something doesn't have a lot of significant public interest, if we're building a pump station or something, there may not want to be a lot of public input there. But something like Oasis would require a lot of extra work and a lot of outreach. So that's really why, we considered his fees to be a little, larger than normal because of the fact that we want to have a lot of outreach in these type of projects.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes,
Uh,
Councilman David.
Question for you, Steve. From reading various memos, we have 3 firms that appear to be qualified, GKK, Barnhart, and Griffin. And as the process seems to be laid out, what would happen is that the staff would select one of those firms, and then that program manager would prepare a guaranteed maximum price, GMP. My question to you is, from a process perspective, why would we not want to have each of those 3 firms submit a GMP? That would maybe lend itself to getting a lower price. Is there a downside to that?
Well, the problem with establishing the GMP is it has to be done at the completion of design development. We're in a situation right now with our staffing that we need to hire someone to manage the project for us from this point forward till the end of design development. So you couldn't have multiple folks doing that.
No, I'm suggesting that instead of saying, okay, we decided it's you, let's negotiate, why not have each of the 3 firms submit a proposal and a price, and then through a competitive process,
Yeah.
The city, that would provide some input, and then perhaps, we have a building committee.
Well, they
that
couldn't submit the guaranteed maximum price, but they could submit a proposal to do the work, and we could have essentially a request for proposals, then evaluate everyone's proposals and pick the most qualified. Remember, we have to use the QVS the process, the quality-based selection, per the state codes and our own city council codes.
And I think the program manager at risk, depending on who it is, would say that there either needs to be 20 to 30% of design development taking place before they feel comfortable in giving you the guaranteed price and locking that in, because they need to know, basically what the design is, as opposed to up front. If they gave you a cost up front, it would be probably very inflated because there's much more that they don't know about the project.
And that's part of the whole process, too, is that as the program manager manages the design of the project, they become intimately familiar with all the aspects of the project. That gives them the confidence level of being able to give us a guaranteed maximum price. If that consultant wasn't involved in that process, they would be very reluctant to give us a price on plans that they weren't intimately involved in.
Well, if you can go back to your slide where you had all the steps lined out a couple slides ago. Yeah. I guess I'm most uncomfortable with the first couple of steps there, the first 2 steps going through the design development process, because, again, the relationship of the program manager to the architect and who's driving that process. Is it the city? Is it the program manager? Where the architect's loyalty lies, and how you actually arrive at that initial design concept. And it concerns me to get that locked in those first 2 steps. Now, beyond that, I have less of a problem with it, but it's those first 2 steps that I find the most bothersome, to lock ourselves into one firm or another.
Well, I think what the program manager acts as our employee, essentially just like a city staff person would act, managing the project, supervising the architect, making sure that the architect meets the city's desires and needs. So I guess the way that this works really is that the first part of it, the first few, this person would act as if they were a city employee, but they're paid under contract.
Okay, but the way we did the initial City Hall study, the architect was hired by the program manager, but you're saying that we can do this where we hire the architect, and
Yes,
we know
we
that
can.
the architect's fiduciary responsibility is to us and not to the program manager.
Yeah, and that's one of the options, if I can, let's see, well, it's way back there, but,
I saw it on
yeah, the architect doesn't necessarily need to be under the program manager. It can also work outside of that. We can have that relationship with the architect if that's something council desires. And it might be advisable to do that.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilman Henn.
And Steve, I think it's also the case that the program manager really has no axe to grind one direction or another here, because he's managing the process. The city, the savings or costs all pass through to the city, and those are all based on bids, regular bid packages. And so, I've had some experience with this, and I think I've had favorable experience, I'd have to say, that the earlier the the architect and the contractor can be made to work together in the planning process here, the better the ideas for value engineering in the process has been my experience.
Councilman Curry?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I apologize for arriving a little late, but we've had the opportunity to have this briefing at the Finance Committee, and I will tell you from the projects that I've been involved in financing across the country, that this is the approach that more and more jurisdictions are moving to for a variety of reasons, most notably risk mitigation in terms of cost overruns and accountability, but also for the need to augment staffing and to provide for faster project delivery. So without getting into the details of which firm could or could not work for us on our projects, I will tell you that I believe this is an appropriate kind of approach, particularly when you look at the scale of the capital program that is coming up in front of the city over the next few years.
Just one more comment to Councilmember Selich's point, though. I do think it's a good idea to have an RFQ process to select the program manager. I don't think that should be just a sole source decision.
And I think all of you have mentioned all of these key features, the fact that we can do some quality-based selection with competitive bidding, and then the fact that the subcontractors are bid out at market rates are key parts of this process as well. I think it is a relatively new process for us, but as you mentioned, it is common. Santa Ana, Rancho Santa Margarita, Cypress have just recently used this process on their public buildings successfully. And as I said, it does require us to kind of stay up with it, and I think we have the structure to do so. I threw in a slide here from, and I also handed out a study that you might want to look at later on. I'm sorry I didn't get that to you beforehand. But the bottom line in this graph pretty much shows that on the basis of cost, the program manager risk process most always met or usually reduced the cost to the owner in this particular study. And it was very interesting. This actually came out of North Carolina, where they do a lot of this work extensively in their public building processes. In fact, the University of North Carolina exclusively uses this for all their major building projects now. We've also, I've done some research and found that in Texas and Northern California, this is catching on nationwide and seems to be a good method. I mean, one of the key issues, and I didn't emphasize it before, is that on schedule, what happens with this process is it does allow us to overlap the design and the construction schedule. So we can reduce construction schedules quite a bit, and as you see in this graph here, the program manager at risk also was very good at meeting the schedule and usually accelerated the schedule. So if you'd like to read on it further, I've included that on the dais for you.
Steve, we should probably stop right there because of time constraints.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions, Steve? All right, thank you, Steve. I guess we'll move on to our next item on the agenda, the review of our new group home ordinance.
Mayor Pro Tem, though, before we leave that issue, I need to let you know that it is going to be important for us to make a decision one way or the other, pretty quickly as to what process that we want to deliver, because definitely it's going to be better for the project, even if we go with our normal traditional approach. So if there is some sense coming from the council to us as to, what we can come back with or what the sense of the council is, I would encourage you to relate that to us.
I will. In a good way.
You already announced the next item. All right, we're going to begin our presentation. I believe our legal counsel, Jim Markman, here with Richard Watson Gashon, is going to have a presentation for us. We'll start off with Dave. You're going to have a little staff report?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. And so first we're basically here to look at the first pass at the ordinance with regard to group homes in town. city has hired special legal counsel, for those of you who are not been to every meeting here about this, in the form of Richard Watsons and Gershon, and that's why Mr. Markman is sitting in the city attorney's spot, because he's special legal counsel for the city on this issue. And so he will be rolling out the new ordinance, or the changes to our ordinances that are being proposed. We will not be taking any action on this item. It's a study session item. It's more of an informational item. Certainly, anybody, and there will be a time for you to comment today. The City Council will not be actually taking action on this ordinance, though, until probably our first meeting in January. So there'll be another month here for, if you don't say what you want to say today, or if you think of something after you leave today, you're more than welcome to contact either Mr. Markman, contact Assistant City Manager Kiff, or any of the council members here with your comments, good or bad, or suggestions, and we'll look at those in the context of the new ordinance that's being developed. And so the next time we'll be hearing this, most likely, as I said, will be our first meeting in January, which is, looks like January 8th. Hopefully we'll have the ordinance on our agenda for review and approval. You'll have an opportunity that night to speak about it as well. And there'll be a second reading of the ordinance, and you'll have an opportunity probably on January 22nd, assuming that the schedule is followed as it looks now. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Kiff for his
Thank you,
presentation.
Mr. Mayor and council members. And, I'd like to also recognize Roxanne Diaz, who's here to my left, also with Richard Watson Gershon, and then ask that, if possible, we hold questions until the end of the presentation. Certainly, if something is burning, go ahead and raise your hand, but I'm trying to answer as many questions as we can throughout the presentation. I'm going to start with what we're going to cover in this presentation, a little bit of background, including the concepts and definitions, paint the picture of what Newport Beach and group residential is like with facility numbers and general locations. I'll summarize the actions of the city since January of '07. And then we'll roll into the key aspects of the proposed ordinances, including some new definitions, which types of uses would be allowed in which zones, abatement of existing uses, a use permit process, and we'll talk a little bit about reasonable accommodation. Jim is going to cover these sections. And then I'll conclude with the timeline from here, including a summary of opportunities for public input, which the mayor just summarized, and then how to find out more information. So in background, this is the first slide of the background because it's fairly important that people in recovery are protected when it comes to housing through the California Fair Employment and Housing Act and the Federal Fair Housing Act and Fair Housing Amendments. They added handicap and familial status to the FHA. Handicap does include persons recovering from alcohol or drug addiction, but not persons currently using. And generally, cities are prohibited from adopting or enforcing policies that are discriminatory or have a disparate impact on members of a protected class. And we're required to make reasonable accommodation when asked. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So let me introduce just some concept and definitions that we'll use throughout the presentation and throughout the 2 hours. ADP, that means we're referring then to the California Department of Alcohol and Drug Programs. This is the state agency which is literally in the business of licensing and certifying treatment facilities. They're there to, in effect, make sure there are more of them, but the more of them are done in accordance with state law. There are 5 types of treatment according to the state. This is important. Detoxification, group counseling, one-on-one counseling, educational sessions, and development of a treatment plan. These are the 5 types of treatment according to state law. It is illegal to provide treatment in an unlicensed facility. Continuing with concepts and definitions, we'll refer to this term as a licensed 6 and under. This is a facility housing 6 or fewer people, licensed by the state to provide treatment, one of those 5 types. And state law says that these facilities must be treated just as a city treats any other single-family use. And there's the Health and Safety Code site. An unlicensed 6 and under is a facility housing 6 or fewer people, but that is not intended to provide treatment on site. It's intended to be a place where people in sobriety reside, whether they sleep or eat, recreate there, while going to meetings or treatment elsewhere. I need to make this clear. It is not illegal to operate an unlicensed residential facility. It is illegal to allow treatment there, but it's not illegal to operate one where treatment doesn't occur on site. Continuing on, you'll hear us talk about larger facilities, whether licensed or unlicensed. State law does allow cities to apply use conditions in local zoning to facilities housing 7 or more residents, but of course subject to those state and federal fair housing laws that we mentioned. Integral facility and integral use. This is a concept whereby small or large facilities, small and or large, licensed or unlicensed, are linked together with common staff, common management, or where clients interact from different facilities. You'll find that this is a common business practice in Newport Beach when I show you the numbers. Continuing on, reasonable accommodation. This is a requirement of federal fair housing laws that say that persons who are disabled have a right to housing. If local regulations impair that right, a person can ask that he or she be reasonably accommodated from that local regulation. Group residential is a term we'll use today. It's just a term referring to boarding or rooming houses, dorms, fraternities, sororities, similar group residential uses, excluding residential care facilities in the context of this discussion. You'll hear us use the term legal nonconforming. This is a term meaning a land use or structure that was legal when it started. In other words, at the time, the codes allowed it, but that later, codes changed, making that use or structure non-conforming to the new codes. So it was legal, but it's now non-conforming. There's no, just so you know, there's no meaning to the term illegal non-conforming. That's just illegal. So let's talk now about what's in Newport Beach. We have 26 different state licensed treatment facilities. And I put an asterisk there because this is a different count than the state uses. The state uses 24, but I'm counting each facility as one dwelling unit. And so we have a couple of them that have one license but 2 dwelling units. It's just 2. The 26 have 213 beds, licensed for 238 occupants. 18 of the 26 are 6 and unders. Only one of the 26 is, and I put possibly, not integrated with other facilities. 3 of the 26 have no beds. Those are for office visits and meetings only. Licenses for 9 more facilities with 56 beds are pending or anticipated to be requested from ADP. All are proposed as 6 and unders, and in my analysis, only one of the 9 is not integrated with another facility. So again, this is the picture of the state licensed facilities in Newport Beach. Now let's talk about unlicensed treatment facilities. We know of at least 54 unlicensed treatment facilities in town. At least 48 of the 54 are operated integrally with other facilities, either licensed or unlicensed. Now 6 more will be in the city limits after January 1st, 2008. These are in West Santa Ana Heights. 4 with Yellowstone Recovery, 2 are quote-unquote Lynn House facilities. Of the 60 that will be in the city when the ordinances take effect, only 6 appear to be true standalone ventures. In other words, 54 after January 1st are arguably integral. The city is still attempting to verify others citywide, but you can see it's a very common business model in Newport Beach for operators to integrate facilities. So continuing on, this is kind of where they are. All known residential facilities and known pending licensed facilities, except 16 are on the 6 of the 84 now, are on the Balboa Peninsula or West Newport. The others are on Lido Isle, in Newport Shores, in Newport Heights, Corona Del Mar, and Newport Coast. The latter 2, at Corona Del Mar and Newport Coast, those are pending licenses. Now, I've brought up this slide before. The city's position is that we are indeed over-concentrated with recovery facilities. We have 14.6 of all licensed recovery beds in Orange County. If you were to distribute all the statewide beds evenly, then we should have 48, but we have 213. And this doesn't even count the number of unlicensed beds. And I can't count those because I don't know what other cities have. It's not something that's required to be reported. Overconcentration may not be beneficial to people in recovery. We've made that point. And it serves instead to proliferate an institutional environment. And this overconcentration, of course, may have an impact on and change the character of neighborhoods. So let me summarize now the actions of the city. In January, we asked Senator Harman to introduce a bill that would have given cities greater ability to regulate group uses. We formed the IROC Committee, Intense Residential Occupancy Committee. That committee met 3 times. In March, we hosted a statewide recovery conference, recovery facilities conference. 90-plus cities attended with 300 people. It was here at the Radisson. In April and May, we adopted and then extended the moratorium on certain group uses. Over the summer and into the fall, a law firm of Goldfarb and Littman developed draft ordinances. They went to the Planning Commission twice in August and September. Planning Commission forwarded ordinances to the City Council on the 20th of September. About that same time, your council hired new special legal counsel, Richard Schwartz and Gershon, are with us today, and they formed a special City Council subcommittee to advise special counsel on this issue. That's Council Members Gardner, Henn, and Mayor Rosansky. In October, the moratorium was extended for 12 months through October 08. In November, the city filed 2 lawsuits against 2 operators alleging that they opened new or expanded facilities in violation of the moratorium. And at the same time, we continued to develop the drafts of these new ordinances. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Mr. Markman to summarize what's in the ordinances. I'll click for you.
Before I start, I want to note for the council that while we're not asking you to adopt or act on an ordinance tonight, we will be asking for direction. May take a council action to either bring forward the ordinance as presented, or as the council may want it to be adjusted depending on what's said today. But we will be looking for your guidance on what the final ordinance that comes to you in January will look like. The purpose of this ordinance, the purpose of this whole process is really to reconcile 2 very powerful public policies. One public policy you've heard about already, and that is to allow for the existence of care facilities and recovery facilities for people defined by law as handicapped people, and not to discriminate against them. And when I say discriminate, I mean unreasonably discriminate, or discriminate in a way where that policy is defeated. On the other hand, there's another policy that is at play here in Newport Beach and every other city in the United States and California, and that is the policy of the ability of the City Council to protect the residential character of its neighborhoods, of its residential neighborhoods. And in fact, we think, having looked at this with staff for 2.5 months now, that there's a conflict in these policies, and the conflict occurred for a lot of reasons, both economic and by virtue of the structure of prior ordinances and regulations. But the fact of the matter is there's been an absorption of these uses in some parts of Newport Beach, which it appears does not allow a residential neighborhood to function as in character as a residential neighborhood anymore. It functions more as an institutional neighborhood, or a neighborhood that's so over-concentrated with these uses, or some of these uses, that the whole purpose behind allowing those uses in residential neighborhoods is being defeated. And in saying that, we've looked at the legislative history, particularly of the 6 or under licensed recovery facilities. And if you read that legislative history, you understand the whole point of essentially divesting cities of the right to regulate those uses. They have to be treated as single-family homes, which means you don't regulate them unless you're going to equally regulate single-family homes. And we know we're not going to require everyone building a single-family home to get a use permit, so no city's going to do that. The whole purpose of that was to put people in small residential environments where 6 or less of them received care and received treatment in a residential neighborhood which was supposed to be conducive to recovery. And when that atmosphere disappears, it's our view that the whole purpose behind the legislation is defeated, And that's pretty much what underlines the definition of integral uses and integral facilities we're going to talk about a little bit later. And the other thing I want to say about this ordinance, because you're going to hear people taking different legal positions today, we feel we're delivering an ordinance that is not facially discriminatory, and we don't believe that it will be administered or applied in a discriminatory fashion. Coming out of this meeting, or if this ordinance is adopted in any resemblance to the structure we're presenting to you, there won't be anybody who leaves this council chamber who is a present operator or a potential operator of one of these facilities in Newport Beach who can say his or her operation has been abated or banned. And we've gone out of our way to structure it that way so that just the existence of the ordinance is not necessarily going to drive any particular operator or facility out of business, nor is it going to deprive a proposed new facility from finding a place in Newport Beach. So I want to make that very clear. So yes, any ordinance you write that tries to reconcile these policies is discriminatory because we're talking about particular uses in particular areas. But is it legally discriminatory so that it's not valid? We don't think so. So those things I think need to be said. So marching now through what we are going to present, the first thing we looked at was in Futura, in the future, well, let's start out with group residential. Group residential, as you have heard, is defined as a lot of these dormitory-like boarding house, fraternity-type uses that are not care facilities or recovery facilities. Those uses are simply not allowed in your residential zones. And those are group residential uses just like the care facilities are. So that needs to be underscored. The definitions of integral facilities, let's talk about that. That is a cutting-edge principle. I would not be shocked if the ordinance on that point alone is subjected to litigation. There's already litigation concerning that notion up in Sausalito over a recovery facility that is trying to open there. So it's a novel concept. There actually are two different definitions. There was a definition in the previous material presented that came out of the Planning Commission, that integral facilities are defined as facilities that essentially are mixed up and used together to provide recovery services to people. In other words, you can be picked up in a bus, you can live one place, you can go to a group meeting in another place, you can go for massage in another place. You can have psychologists, masseuses, anybody dealing with these people in recovery go from facility to facility, providing these services. So an operator that wants to be a large operator can stack these uses where only 6 people or less are living in one place, but the fact is they're operating as one large operation and mixing up their facilities and the people supplying the services. We've looked very carefully at the regulations on 6 or under, and this particularly impacts 6 or under license because the way this ordinance is drafted, if a 6 or under license is integrated with other facilities or is an integrated use, it's not exempt from regulation. That's the position we're taking. It has defeated the purpose of being unregulated, provided in state law, according to the legislative history and anything else you'll read about it. So if that's the case, they'll be treated, they have been treated and placed in zoning categories the same as large group uses, large recovery uses or recovery uses general. Integral uses, I think, is as or more important. An integral use, as we have defined it, is an operation which takes people from any 6 or under unlicensed facility and treats them in a group in their program with anybody else from another facility, so that you can't say 6 or less people have been grouped together as a unit for recovery programming because they've been mixed up with other people. So they're really in a larger group for the purpose of receiving their recovery treatment. If that's the case, again, we don't think that they should be treated as a 6 or under licensed facility because that has defeated the purpose of the family setting, residential atmosphere recovery program for 6 or less people that the legislature has essentially taken out of control of city councils and counties all over the state. So that's the importance of the integral facilities, integral use definitions. Cutting-edge legal stuff could lead to litigation, maybe not. But we think it's a right course to follow, and if there's a risk attached to it, the risk ought to be taken by the council. In the future, now let's go to this. This is a good slide. It shows you how all of these uses are going to be treated under this ordinance, should it be adopted. First, look all the way to the bottom. No more group residential uses in any R zones, even in the multifamily MFR zone. None. So if there's any discrimination against any particular type of group residential use, it's all of them other than the recovery facilities, because no more will be allowed in under any circumstances. Licensed 6 and under, if they are truly licensed 6 and under and not integral, are allowed as a matter of right by state law in all residential zones and have to be treated the same as a single-family residence. Licensed 6 and unders that are part of integral operations are going to be treated like unlicensed or large operations. All three of those, any other operation for one of these facilities is going to be allowed. These are new operations. Are going to be allowed in the MFR zone only with the issuance of a conditional use permit. So that's how these are being treated in this structure. So if there's going to be a proliferation, it's going to be a proliferation in the MFR zone that's going to be scrutinized application by application unless it's a true 6 or under licensed facility. So we said existing, okay, let's go to existing facilities. At this point, you might say, well, what about the existing operators? Since obviously we've just changed the zoning, and 6 or under unlicensed, for example, are not allowed in these RZOs without any permit processing, and any new ones have to go into MFR. The ones that are already here have a grandfather provision that allows them to stay where they are if they choose to seek the issuance of a conditional use permit, go through the scrutiny inherent in an administrative process, be analyzed in that process, be conditioned if it's indicated that they be conditioned, with which conditions might make them compatible with the residential character of the neighborhood. I have no idea. There's a whole lot of dozens of them. And if they want to stay, they have an opportunity to stay. There'll be an inventory of all these uses that are rendered nonconforming by this ordinance, which presumably is already undergoing on the theory the ordinance may be adopted. And at the end of that inventory, there'll be a notice that goes out. The timeline for seeking this use permit to stay in operation is 90 days. It says 90 days after February 22nd, 2008. That's assuming there's an ordinance passed at second reading on February 22nd, 2008. So it'll be 90 days after the passage of the ordinance. Why don't you back up a little bit? Let me talk about, there's a hearing officer. We've done this, so let me talk about this now to get rid of any confusion. We are proposing that the council have all of these hearings for these use permits, as well as reasonable accommodations, which we'll talk about a little bit later, farmed out, if you will, to hearing officers. Now, this could be, and we're happy to talk about any impacted party about this, but the council can choose, okay, who are going to be the hearing officers, and we think there may have to be multiple hearing officers if you want to process these promptly, and everybody has a chance for prompt processing, which would benefit everybody. We're thinking in terms of retired judge panels, people with experience adjudicating issues, people that are going to be undeniably unbiased about every one of these that they look at. That hearing officer is going to be the fact-finding body for the purpose of processing these CUPs and the reasonable accommodation applications. They will make findings. They will render a decision, which might be this use permit is issued. This use permit is issued subject to all of the following conditions, or this use permit is denied for all of the following reasons. That's a final decision unless appealed to the council. If it is appealed to the council will not have to do this hearing all over again. The council is not doing de novo findings. The council will look at what's come up to it There'll be arguments by legal counsel or whoever wants to argue, and the council can then decide whether to sustain the hearing officer, reverse the hearing officer, change conditions, or send the matter back for further hearing on either selected issues that you don't think you have enough facts on, having looked at the record, or have the whole hearing done over. So the council's acting more or less as an appellate, a real appellate body, not a body that's going to sit through 120 de novo hearings. And we're suggesting this both to get any thought of bias in any of this process out of the process and to streamline the process. No offense whatsoever meant to the Planning Commission. But these are obviously going to be sensitive legal hearings from the legal point of view that might result in litigation, and we need to expedite. And that's the reason for that. I can't imagine the Planning Commission trying to deal with as many of these as may come. Because, as I said at the start, every present operator and every present operation has a right to seek this permit. In the permit process, we've also talked about particular standards that we're hardwiring into this ordinance for if these permits are issued, and these are some of them, most of which were pretty much already in the prior drafts, but let me talk about some of this. The 2-person per bedroom standard was already in the prior drafts, and we didn't hear any argument or see any reason to change that. This is something new. There was some discussion we've heard during this whole process about one of the major problems being large groups of people who are outside, particularly in what we call the non-standard zoning ordinance, substandard zoning area, where you've got very small side yard setbacks, any setbacks, houses are very crowded together. You've got groups of people outside talking, whatever they're doing, and smoking, so as to create tremendous billows of secondhand tobacco smoke that are really troubling people. We heard that as a common complaint. And since our feeling is the city could pretty much ban smoking outdoors, period, the city felt like doing it, that in this use permit process, if any secondhand smoke is detected on any property other than the property where the program is operated, that'll be considered a violation, a hardwired standard into the use permit. Some have said, well, this is difficult to enforce and all of this, but we're not trying to draw a real fine line here. What we're saying is if you get a use permit issued, you can continue operating, or you get a new one and you can operate. If people come back to the city and they're willing to sign declarations that they saw, the usual activity, 10 or 15 people outside, after some activity, blowing smoke into their backyard or into their windows, that's going to be reported, and there'll be a use permit revocation proceeding as a result of it, and because that's a very common complaint. We're going to require all the operators to comply with all the laws, including paying your business license tax if that's what you owe. We're going to require plans to be submitted by the operators for transportation, parking, delivery of materials that are needed on site, so that we get some idea of trying to control congestion, parking problems, overcrowded. They'll be submitting an operational plan and being expected to be consistent with it. And then we get down to the big one, which is what these hearings are really going to be all about is, okay, is this compatible, is this particular operation compatible with the residential character of the neighborhood? There are cases, and I'm sure legal counsel for the operators are going to speak, but I can tell the council there are cases that allow a city to protect and maintain the character of the community for which it has zoned and general plan, particularly the residential character of the community. And all we're saying here is, what is the impact of that operation on the character of the community? Is it contributing to overconcentration? Are there things about it that are just incompatible with the residential character of the neighborhood? And so these applications are going to have to catalog, for example, where are all the other similar uses? How close are they? Where are they? Where are the other uses you operate, whether in this city or otherwise? What issues or problems, if any, have you had with respect to those operations with legal authority be it state or local. We really want to get a handle on these case by case, and I'm sure very, very many of them are perfectly legitimate operations that aren't eating away at the tranquility or residential character of the neighborhood, but some probably are. So having said that, there's more specific criteria listed in the ordinance to look at. One is, what's the proximity of the particular use to schools, parks, other group uses, and alcoholic beverage outlets? Obviously, that pertains, let's go back to that a second, Dave. That pertains to the welfare of the people in the recovery programs as well as others. Let me talk about schools. That's an interesting one. You say, well, what's that all about? Well, here's what it's all about. We have specific evidence that there's been large group meetings or just gatherings of people in programs. For example, just on the beach right next to tot lots that are part of an elementary school, where they just sort of, interact in the usual way, which can include a whole lot of profanity and a whole lot of smoking and blowing secondhand smoke onto the tot lot or the facility at the school where all the kids are at the time they're there, which kind of amazes me, and I'm sure any operation can control and stop that. So that's why that particular criteria is in the mix. So a lot of these criteria are based on what we've seen and heard, what the actual problems have been. The next two are interesting. The second one that goes into deeper into the issue of compatibility is whether the existence of the non-standard lots and other property characteristics in a particular described area that was previously described by the Planning Commission is described in this ordinance as it's referred to as a non-standard subdivision map. It's where you have lots without a lot of frontage, with very little setback, side yard, front yard, rear yard. Some of these lots are on blocks that are usually about half as long linearly as the usual block, residential block in town. Actually, we've had that really. We drilled into that today, and we found that the typical block in this part of Newport Beach we're talking about is about 300 feet long, and the typical block citywide is 600 feet long. And so if you look at the next criteria, this all kind of merges together. The hearing officer has an opportunity, he's not required, but he has an opportunity to apply American Planning Association standard that says, for the sake of the people in recovery as well as the character of the neighborhood, having one or two group uses per block is appropriate. So we're asking the hearing officer not that he has to follow the APA standard, but to look at the APA standard. And when we say block, the next thing we say it may be appropriate to deviate from that standard of a block in an area where the block is only 300 feet long, where everywhere else it's 600 feet long. And that's a concept that we may hear more about today in this meeting. And there is, in the black, are the areas that have these substandard or non-standard subdivision areas. So I guess to wrap up the key aspects of the ordinance, it says abatement of existing uses. That's an overstatement, as you probably already guessed from what I said. What it really means is if you're a 6 or under license and you're a legitimate 6 or under license, I don't mean legitimate in any terrible pejorative sense. I mean if you're not part of an integral use pretending to be 6 or under on license, you can continue to exist, and everyone else already operating can continue to exist if it's successful in seeking a use permit. Time periods, let's assume no use permit is issued or someone doesn't seek a use permit. Here's the period that then becomes a real abatement period. 1 year from the date of the effective date of the ordinance is your basic abatement period. However, if one of two other periods is shorter, then the shorter period prevails. The shortest period of 3 prevails. 1 year, or the termination of the lease period of the lease that you're operating under, or the termination of the license from ADP that you're operating under. Whichever the earliest one is your presumptive abatement date. That date will be extended if you're pursuing your right to either obtain a use permit or a reasonable accommodation finding, and if you're diligently pursuing that, you can continue to operate during that pursuit. And finally, you can also be extended in the event that you have contracted with people in recovery to receive your treatment program, so long as that contract is entered into at a reasonable time. You can't just keep contracting after you know you're running out of time, but if our feeling is if people are allowed to operate while they're pursuing their permits, they got to be allowed to contract with people to continue to operate rationally so that they have their business actually operating. So you can fulfill your contractual obligations. I think we've got some specific timelines on that where it's got to be, if there is such a contract, it's got to be one that's common in the industry as to its length, and it has a cap of 60 days, so that this doesn't become some kind of open-ended extension. On to, let's assume that you either did not seek or did not obtain a use permit, or obtain a use permit with conditions you don't want to live with. You still have the opportunity to seek a reasonable accommodation under federal law. Reasonable accommodation, in order to apply for a reasonable accommodation, next page, next slide, you have to, first of all, show you're a person with a disability or you're a provider of housing for people with disabilities. And the second point is important. I want to underscore it. We think that there's enough body of law to require, and this is new from what came out of the Planning Commission, that there's enough body of law to require that you have to show that it's necessary that you be provided an opportunity to run your program or to house yourself in the particular dwelling unit or housing unit that you're aiming at. And that brings into issue the availability of a whole lot of other places in Newport Beach or other neighboring cities where you could do so. In other words, we don't think reasonable accommodation, if this particular issue is put before a court, the court's going to say, we don't care if there's 1,000 other opportunities. All you have to do is pick one house, start an operation, and you're automatically going to get a reasonable accommodation. I don't think that's what reasonable accommodation is all about. That's another area of the law where the precedents and the legal authorities leave a whole lot of room for litigating if somebody gets to that point and wants to litigate that particular process. And there are certain findings that are required in the ordinance in order to approve, conditionally approve, or deny a request for reasonable accommodation. At the end of all of that, if somebody can prove that they have such a substantial investment in their operation that they're allowed essentially under law to amortize it over a longer period of time, or in other words, that a taking might be affected if you get them to move in 1 year, they still have an opportunity under your zoning ordinance to come in and try to show that as well. So again, what we've tried to do is stem the proliferation, put it where it always belonged, as far as most of these uses are concerned, MFR zone, allow any present operation to continue, or at least provide an administrative process where they can show that they should be allowed to continue to operate and be allowed to continue to operate while they're pursuing those permits. We're trying to be realistic. We're trying to do something here that really will cause something to happen in Newport Beach to create a much more compatible situation between the residential character of the neighborhoods and the continuation of at least some of the recovery uses. We don't think that the courts or the law is going to make render Newport Beach helpless to deal with the present situation. These regulations had been in place a while ago, and you didn't have a bunch of people who probably have to go through the use permit process to continue to operate. You probably wouldn't hear a peep about it. And I don't think the law is going to tell Newport Beach or any other city well, sorry, you got yourself in a situation where you can't change your regulations to deal with it. And if you can't do this, which is pretty much all administrative process, that takes a good hard look at the merits of everyone's particular situation, then the courts would be telling you there's really nothing you can do, and I don't think that's going to happen. So we're ready to recommend proceeding with this ordinance, subject to any modifications, questions the council has, or modifications that would come out of this meeting. We want to leave here today with an instruction to bring back an ordinance in January.
And Mr. Mayor, I'll briefly finish up now with, for folks at home in the audience, this is the timeline from here that Mayor Rosansky had referred to. Today's study session with this presentation, there's an opportunity for public comment both this afternoon and again tonight. This is not on the agenda tonight. It would be a general public comment section. Anytime from this point through January 8th, comments are welcome via emails, letters, or phone calls. And at that time, staff with Richards, Watson, Gershon would revise the draft ordinances based on input. Our intention is to bring this back to you on January 8th. That's the first meeting in January. That's called first reading. That's a public hearing. There are more public comments as a regular nighttime agenda item. Then between January 8th and the 22nd, continued comments are welcomed. We might revise the draft based on that input, but the intent is to shoot for second reading with not a lot of changes and adoption on January 22nd. And at that time, the inventory, which would officially begin February 22nd, the ordinance would take effect, and at a similar action, the moratorium would expire. Your council would have to proactively expire the moratorium. So just that 30-day gap is within our charter. It takes 30 days for an ordinance to take effect after adoption. And then working on that 90-day timeline, existing uses must have applied for a use permit by May 22nd. For more information for folks at home, folks in the audience, this is our website. This is where you can see the documents that are in the council packets. We'll put the PowerPoint up there as well. You can email us. That's my email. And then call us or write us. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I'll turn that back to you.
Well, let me add one thing, Mr. Mayor. By the way, when we say the moratorium is going away, when this ordinance goes into effect, it'll go away, but we're going to maintain the right to enforce it against any violations that occurred while it was in effect. So for those who have been sued, don't take heart by the fact it's going away, because we're going to continue to process those suits.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Markman and Dave. I'll open it up now for council comment. Councilman Henn, sorry.
We're really here to hear from the public, and so I'll make my comments very brief. But I would like to say that this ordinance process is the result of a mandate from the City Council to address this issue as fully and aggressively as the law will allow. My personal view is that we have ordinances before us here today that are by far and away the broadest, most aggressive, most effective ordinances that will have been enacted by any city in the state of California to address this issue. It remains to be seen, and we'll hear from the public, whether or not these ordinances go far enough. But I will say they go a long way, just as they are right now. There are 4 broad objectives that we were seeking to accomplish with these ordinances. The first was to assure that there will be no further proliferation of uses that can change the character of our residential neighborhoods. In other words, to stop a worsening of the situation. I think these ordinances are very effective in that respect. The second broad purpose is to make certain that where we have unacceptable levels of over-concentration of existing uses, that those levels are substantially ameliorated in the city. These ordinances have effective mechanisms to make that happen. The third purpose is to assure that those locations that do continue in our city to operate are operated by good operators and operated in a way that minimize or eliminate deleterious impacts on the character of the neighborhoods in which they operate. And I think if you read these ordinances, you'll see there's a long list of tests and requirements associated with that. Lastly, these ordinances allow us to abate or eliminate that is, those uses and/or operators who either cannot qualify or choose not to qualify, but in any event, who must go away. And these ordinances have a very specific set of rules and procedures to make that happen. And that will rely upon vigorous enforcement and action by the city after these ordinances are passed, and I'm confident that we will have that.
Okay, any other council member that wants to make a comment or question?
I've just got a couple of questions. In your criteria for the use permit, you had the secondhand smoke
Yes.
criteria there. How do you realistically approach secondhand smoke as a criteria for a group home facility if they need to be regulated equally with other residential uses, if you're not going to apply it to every other use that exists there?
Well, because we have evidence that, you may hear some today, that this is where the problem is. That we haven't heard, first of all, other kinds of group homes other than recovery facilities for the most part are not allowed in any of these zones at all. So they're gone, and unless some of them exist, and I'm not sure they do, things like dormitories and boarding houses are just not allowed in the zone at all. So we're not dealing with them. They're gone. So the only other kind of group home is the ones we're talking about. And we have specific evidence that this is a major complaint, a major derogation of the nature of the neighborhoods, that there are crowds of people who gather, whether they gather outside after programs or whatever they do. They talk, some of it's profane, that's a speech issue, but they smoke. And so you get a lot of people smoking at one time that's actually impacting people's lives on a very regular basis on some of these blocks, particularly in the substandard zoning area. So that's where the problem is, and we put it in the context of somebody seeking a use permit. Somebody wants to file a lawsuit and say, well, that's discriminatory. Well, no, because anybody has to seek a use permit to operate, whether they're there now or whether they're a new one coming into the MFR zone, are going to have the same standard applied to them. Other group homes aren't even allowed in. So if anyone's discriminated against, it's really the other group homes.
Well, I guess my question is, if you had two MFR properties, same size, two fourplexes, sixplexes, whatever, next to each other, one has a group home in one or more of the units and another one doesn't, how are you not being discriminatory if on one property you're saying you're regulating secondhand smoke and the other property they're free to smoke away?
Well, it may be discriminatory, but it's in reaction to a specific problem that has been documented to exist, not necessarily in everybody's apartment house where you get these gathering groups doing this. You know, I mean, I'm not trying to, I can tell the council that it may be, if somebody wants to attack on that basis, you have an option of doing a no smoking ordinance that takes care of it by just saying nobody can smoke outside in these areas anyway. I mean, that's right there if you guys want to do that.
Okay, well, my second question on the criteria is the list of criteria seemed rather short. Did you consider more criteria, and did you reject them, or what was the basis for coming up with that list of criteria?
The criteria, actually, there's a long list of findings, much longer than what I talked about. So the criteria that we discussed specifically are criteria that have to do with the proliferation, overcrowding, or institutionalizing of the areas. That's what we aimed at. We also aimed at operational plans, traffic, deliveries, everything we could think of that addresses this issue of the relationship between these uses and the residential uses in these areas.
Well, I guess I was heading toward the point of getting more objective rather than subjective in the criteria, like X number of deliveries a day or something like that, getting more specific in
Okay,
the
well, I can
criteria.
respond to that. Okay,
Rather than generalized findings.
Right, but did not want to go there because everything depends on the particular use that's being discussed. A use may come in there that has absolutely no problem submitting a plan that's going to show there's no delivery issues. Another use might come in there and there's some real issues. So all we can talk about is things the hearing officer will look at, and the hearing officer is going to have to set conditions, but everyone's going to be different because we have to apply this ordinance in a non-discriminatory way. So everyone's going to be looked at, and if they're eligible to receive the use permit and keep operating, they're going to get conditions hand-tailored out of the hearings. But I can't possibly do that with potentially 100 to 150 different situations to deal with. I can't tell you two deliveries a day there will create a terrible problem. I'm not sure that's universally applicable.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Daigle?
Yes, Mr. Markman, in terms of a revocation of a use permit hearing, who would you anticipate would be the hearing body for that?
Same hearing officer, the way we wrote the ordinance, would also deal with revocations. Hearing officers. We're not trying to put the Planning Commission out of all other sorts of business by just giving them this.
Councilman Curry?
Yes, Mr. Morgan, you're confident that the council has the ability to regulate smoking on private property to the extent that it generates secondhand smoke that travels across the property line?
Yes.
Okay, as a matter of established law or
Well, you have that, for example, Beverly Hills just passed an ordinance that doesn't allow smoking.
Very good.
And I think anywhere in a commercial zone outside. That's right. So I think that city's what just left it to be inside your house or in your backyard, and that's all that's left in town.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else have questions of Mr. Markman? All right, seeing no one,
By the way, if the council's uncomfortable with any of this, like that, smoking is something very important to the people who are suffering right now with these incompatibilities, but that's why we're having this workshop. If you're uncomfortable with any of this, we can go forward as you direct, without part of it, or with more of it, or however you come out of this meeting.
Councilman Henn?
My personal view on the issue of smoking is that we should be on the aggressive side of that. The health effects of secondhand smoke are a well-established problem these days. I view it as a serious safety issue.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, I don't see anyone else from council that has any questions, so I'm going to open it up for public comment now. Don't run up yet. Craig, sit down, please. Thank you. I'll lay some ground rules out first. We have a lot of people here, and we only have about another hour to discuss this issue, maybe a little bit more. But what I'm going to do, I see Mr. Titus in the audience. I see Ms. Overman in the audience. They're both associated with the Concerned Citizen, so I'm going to give them the first opportunity to speak. I also see representatives from the sober living industry, so I'm going to give them the second opportunity to speak, and then I'm going to open it up to the general public to speak. We've had a little bit of applause on Councilman Henn's comment. I would please ask you to refrain from applause. This is not a cheering section. This is not the time for that. It takes away from the time that we have left. So please refrain from applauding. If you have something to say, come up and say it. If your point has already been made, please let someone else come up and make another point, because we want to get as much information as possible. If you don't have an opportunity to come up and speak tonight, please put your comment or your thought into writing and email it to either Councilman Henn, myself, any of us up here, Mr. Markman, City Manager's Office, anybody, and we'll make sure it's looked at. So with that, is Mr. Titus or Ms. Overman, did you want to come up and speak?
Yep.
Yeah, you're gonna have the time limit for public comments is 5 minutes. For the first half hour, we'll allow 5-minute comments, and then I think for the last half hour, we're going to allow 3-minute comments with the indulgence of council. Is everybody in agreement with that? Okay.
Thank you, Council. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everybody in the audience is aware that the city is, in fact, filming this presentation, and also the Operation Sober Living by the Sea is filming this operation, just so you're aware of that. I know that some of you are questioning what the additional camera is in the room. Yeah, I'm going to talk very briefly about some background and then put up some points that I think are key data points that we really feel need to be memorialized in the record and asserted so that there's clarity in considering the proposed ordinance. Very quickly, this is not a new issue. Citizens have asked for reasonable regulation since 2003. What has happened, and this just gives you a graphical representation in terms of residential treatment facilities and the growth of that type of use, primarily in the impacted coastal zone. We had 5 licensed facilities in 2003 prior to the passage of the 2004 ordinance. We now have 2004 to 2006, depending upon whose count you want to rely on, in 2007. So that is an increase of multiple of 5 times, which is certainly disproportionate to the increase in population. Secondly, another metric for understanding what the growth in this type of use has been, and what we feel is uncontrolled and really unjustifiable growth, is that there were approximately 100 licensed beds, total of 200 beds in 2004, pre-ordinance change at that time, which grew to over 1,000 beds in 2007. And of course, that's a metric combining licensed and unlicensed facilities. So where we are in 2007 at this point is approximately rounded 220 beds licensed to operate with ADP, and approximately 800 beds that exist in unlicensed facilities. Just very quickly, we're going to be talking more, and the council is going to be considering various criteria. And this illustrates what we had in the coastal area, and maybe we could zone in some clarity. So you can see that the licensed facilities at that point in time, as well as currently, are almost exclusively located on the Balboa Peninsula, West Newport, and the Lido area, and somewhat spaced out. And interestingly enough, you've got 2 up in the West Newport area, and then the remainders in a residential area very proximate to Newport Elementary School. So that's what you had before the ordinance was changed in 2004. In 2007, this is what we're looking at. For any of you that haven't seen this map, you can see that there are quite a number of additional facilities. There's a perpetuation of the close proximity of these to one another, and more importantly, the fact that these facilities are all located in the dense coastal residential neighborhood. So what we have is we have approximately 110 facilities. Some of the operators have indicated that they have, or their count is up as much as 150, but we're not aware of those. Located in a 1.5 stretch of our coastal neighborhood. They're in dense residential neighborhoods, which has created an institutionalization and effectively a taking of those neighborhoods. There are a number of adverse impacts, and the adversity of the impacts is important because it's damaging not only to individual residents, specific neighborhoods, or the community at large, but they're also damaging to the disabled addicts that are genuinely attempting to rehabilitate or recover. The overconcentration in the city at large, and more specifically the coastal area in particular, is documented to be the worst in California and potentially at broader end. So, and the city has already, there's already been a finding that the 219 beds, which were counted in I believe it was July 2007, the ADP licensed facilities, constitutes overconcentration. Now, the one point I do want to make there is those findings of overconcentration do not include the 800 unlicensed facilities. Let me just flip that very quickly. Okay. So where is this overconcentration occurring more specifically? The Balboa Peninsula, Lido, and that includes Lido Isle, the village and the peninsula, and West Newport. And it is extending to the immediately surrounding neighborhoods, Newport Heights, beginnings of Corona del Mar and Harborview Hills, and then, as Dave mentioned, Santa Ana Heights. What are the characteristics of this coastal community that are intensifying the impacts of overconcentration? Well, first of all, the coastal communities are evolved uses. They are not master planned communities. They have very small blocks. The blocks are typically not more than 300 feet in length. The lot uses of R1, 1.5, and 2 are mixed together as single-family neighborhood and without premeditation and placement. The lots are small and narrow, and there are narrow setbacks, frequently only several feet between residents, and in almost no circumstances greater than 8 feet, sometimes not even fire clearance sufficiency. And this density, even without considering the group homes issue, has created a parking, traffic, smoking exposure, and other types of health and safety-related problems. What's the profile in this community? The profile's been changing. I know that Craig Batley is going to speak a bit more about what he calls an eclectic community, but it's not a world dominated by transiency. There are families, there are professionals, all varying ages and backgrounds. There are people that are retired that choose to live here, and some people, like retired teachers, have lived here for a very long time, and probably if they wanted to live here now couldn't afford their homes, but their homes are really what they have. There are people that have both primary and secondary homes, and the common attribute that all of these residents have is that they all value an open, safe environment where they can go outside, where they can breathe clean air, where they can walk, where they can take their kids or their families, meet their friends, and where it's a safe environment. So I know that Mike Titus and Elaine Tabor will talk a little bit more about a planning-based solution, so I'll be quick on this. But careful planning and management is really critical to maintain synergistic, compatible uses. If any of you wonder where those words come from, they come from the APA, and I heard them reflected in the Irvine Company presentation on the proposed development plan. To maintain the integrity of residential neighborhoods, to avoid institutionalization, which may be detrimental. It is detrimental to neighbors, the community, and the disabled addicts. And as we move forward with this process, there is evidence available that the institutionalization and overconcentration that's been created is definitely detrimental to all of those groups, including the citizens and those that individuals that may be in a protected class. And lastly, support the objectives of the general plan. I'm a hog with the time here. Overconcentrate, I'm not going to go through all these details because I think they'll be elaborated on. But we really need to have an immediate remedial action plan to alleviate the overconcentration that exists in the coastal area, what we have called the impacted area. We do not see such a plan in the ordinances. And one of the things that we feel is going to have to be vetted out, we do feel that there's a lot of good, careful thinking in the ordinances, but the ordinances are relying very heavily on the CUP process to drive through a right sizing and also to accomplish what needs to be a remedial action in this area. And we're not going to wait for that. There are cumulative effects that are going on, that continue to go on as this institutionalization in our neighborhoods continue. And we're not going to wait for 5, 10, unspecified period of time with the risk that there's not going to be a solution. So I'd like to convey to you that we need to have a remedial plan that has sufficient definition of a plan, objective, and the uses that we can be assured that there is going to be some remediation of this condition. We are looking for unlicensed facilities to be...
Okay, Ms. Overman, how much more time do you think you're going to need, because you've already gone double?
I've already gone double.
Yes.
Well, I don't want to do that. I've got some maps in here with the zoning map, and that's just for illustrative purposes. I'd encourage the council and also the members of the public and the group home operators to also look and consider this map. Impacted area as defined by the city, which is the coastal area having those types of characteristics and which currently has overconcentration. And then we're looking for management of existing uses. We don't want to see grandfathering on its face. We want to be careful consideration. And we'd like to see this meeting, and definitely prior to the ordinances, a specific objective defined about what the right level of this use is in the city at large and in the impacted area in particular. And we would propose that the 220 beds that are represented in the current licensed facilities is more than enough of this use to more than satisfy the local need, obviously. And also, we're prepared to work on that with a good plan for dispersal and management of the operators. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Overman. Mr. Titus, I'm going to give an opportunity now for the operators to speak. It was either or for you two, so we're not going to have, you'll have your 5 minutes, but that's going to be it. So is there someone from the operator community that wants to speak at this point in time? Here's your chance. Okay, I'll open it up now. I've given Ms. Overman some leeway because she does represent a large group of residents here, but from now on, we'll be sticking to the 5-minute schedule.
Can I take advantage of the 5 minutes for opening comments right now?
I'm sorry?
Can I take my 5 minutes right now?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Mayor Rosansky, members of council, good evening. My name is Michael Titus of Jackson, DeMarco, Titus, Peterson, and Peckinpah. I represent concerned citizens. First thing I want to point out to you is in the ordinance, there are findings for CUP and findings for reasonable accommodation. We would like to see, and we think it's important, that the hearing officer have certain criteria upon which to base the decision. Remember, the hearing officer, particularly at the beginning, is not going to be as familiar with what all of you know today as being the problem. And we insist that there be a 1,000-foot setback or distance between each of the different facilities from elementary schools and other schools, from bars, and other incompatible uses. And they say, where do we get 1,000 feet? Well, I can point to other cities that use 1,000 feet, but I'll look at the American Planning Association. They talk about 1, possibly 2 per block. So what does a block mean? Well, our firm represents almost every publicly traded home builder in the country, national builders. And I called their Ford planners and I asked them, tell me, what do you think a block would be? And I don't mean in Newport Beach, I mean just in general. And they say, 10,000 square foot house, 10,000 square foot lot, 80-foot width, 900 feet long. That's a block for them. And I said, well, why do you say 900 feet? And they say, well, our typical 10,000 square foot house, block, would be 80 feet wide, 120 deep, and we would have them strung out on a street no longer than 900 feet, and that would be a block for us. So that's why we picked 1,000. Now, can the hearing officer, I think your counsel will tell you, that picking 1,000 feet is not irrational. It's rational in a situation where you have impacted areas. And what we're talking about here is you have a map, which is already in the administrative record, showing how these particular areas are significantly impacted. The hearing officer needs to know from the council, look at this situation. This is a problem. 1,000 feet distance is rational and should be applied. Now, there may be exceptions, and that's why the hearing officer has to do the review. But 1,000 feet should be the standard. The other point that I think is implicit, but nobody really says it, every one of these CUPs has to be subject to the California Environmental Quality Act. They are projects. And as such, the applicant has to do in some type of environmental document, whether it's a mitigated neg deck, whether it's an EIR for a larger project, but they need to show to the hearing officer what is the impact on traffic, noise, secondhand smoke, all the other items that everybody else has to do. You build a single-family home, you still have to comply with CEQA. All right. There is, I think, implicit in that, but I think I would suggest that the ordinance be changed to say that all applications must comply with CEQA. Now, this brings us to the issue of the unlicensed facilities. I think you saw from the chart here that at one point in time, we had 100 beds in the city. That's our fair share. Now we have 1,000 beds. But if you look at our fair share of licensed facilities, there's 200 some odd beds that are within the licensed facilities. That's plenty for Newport Beach's fair share. And we would urge that the council, when it's adopting the ordinance, put into the ordinance for the hearing officer to consider the licensed facilities, which are better for the disabled, be given preference. There's no way to be sure if they're unlicensed, whether it's a flop house or a parolee house. There's no way to ensure that these unlicensed facilities are appropriately taking care of the people. Good planning, if you have to make a choice between a licensed facility and unlicensed, I think we should ban unlicensed facilities. Now, there are other areas I want to just briefly touch upon, and that is there needs to be an outside limit on the extensions on the amortization period. We have a specific amortization period with an application to the hearing officer and give them additional time. There should be an outside date of, say, 60 or 90 days. It should not be open-ended for the hearing officer. Public notice, I think that we all have to be assured that the hearing officer hearings are public, everybody's allowed to participate, notice is given, as it would be for any hearing, and those individuals and persons who want to have notice should be given specific notice when they register. I see my time is up. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilman
If-
Harmon.
I think this is valuable. If you have other, how much more time would you require?
Probably another 2 or 3 minutes.
I would suggest that we give it to him.
Okay, 2 minutes. 2.5 minutes. 3 minutes. Take 3 minutes. Why not? It's just, we have a lot of people here, Mr. Titus.
Yeah, I
Obviously,
know.
I
I
want to hear
understand
from, we've heard from you. You have a direct link to our attorney. All these positions, I'm sure, are well known to him. So none of it's new. I'd like to get some new information from other residents.
I understand, but you are the decision maker, so I'd like to be able to talk directly to you. And I
Feel
know
free
that
to call me at any time.
during the CUP process, the failure of an applicant to comply with state, local, and federal regulations should be grounds for failure to give them the CUP. It's identified there in the ordinance. I want to make sure it's clarified that if you're not obeying the law, you can't come back in now today and ask for a CUP. That counts against you. The other thing is the hearing officer has to comply with all state laws, no backroom deals. The hearing officer has to make his decision public. It has to comply with the regulations, and it has to be public. Now, who should be there? I agree with your counsel, probably retired judges. But we need to have enough of them so that we can deal with this on a timely fashion. It can be done. Most of these facilities are going to be operated by half a dozen of these operators. They're going to come in with CUPs. It can be dealt with quickly, as long as the city shows the willpower to go through this process. And in terms of the inventory of nonconforming uses, do an inventory. But make sure you're not waiting for the inventory to start the CUP process. You need to start it after the 90 days. Either make the application for CUP or you're out. And if you make the application, it's in their best interest to get the CUP application started and finished so that the operators who are going to stay know they can stay, and those who have to leave amortize out. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Titus. Councilman Henn?
I have a question actually for staff that drove out of that comment, perhaps the attorney. This inventory process, this construction of an inventory is not an all or nothing one-shot deal, as I understand it, that we can produce an inventory, distribute it, act on it. Then if it needs to be amended or expanded or even contracted after that, we can do that too and act on that. Is that correct? So there's no real waiting requirement.
Well, that's correct, and we disconnected from the prior drafts, we disconnected the inventory process from the timeline for seeking the use permits. So the use permits have to be sought within 90 days of the effective date of the ordinance. The inventory is going to be done. Notices will go out. We do not have a hearing process for somebody to come in and separately say, well, we really conform, we're not a non-conforming use. We've streamlined the process to eliminate that, and the inventory is always subject to amendment.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Aileen Tabor. I'm also an attorney with Jackson, DeMarco, Titus, Peterson, and Peckinpah, representing the concerned citizens of Newport Beach. But I also happen to be a certified land use planner for the American Planning Association, and I have my AICP. And what I wanted to just briefly bring to your attention this evening is a little bit about the planning basis for addressing this problem. You've heard a lot about the legal basis, but I think it's also important to go back and think about the whole idea of good planning and what is a good planning-based solution for the problem. As you know, one of the very most important functions of local government is planning and zoning, and that the goal of planning is really to create a community that is a good place for the residents to live, work, play, and be able to go to school. A city plan provides for a safe, attractive residential area that promotes family life. And zoning is the method by which you implement your plans. As you know, the idea behind zoning is that land use decisions for particular areas, like neighborhood areas, that the idea is that these uses that are allowed in that particular zone are consistent, they fit together, and they're compatible uses. We all know, and cities zone this way, that residents don't want to live next door to factories that are bellowing smoke, or living next to noisy malls or high-traffic areas. And so the whole idea of zoning is to prevent that situation from occurring and to separate out these uses that are really incompatible. What's happened in the city of Newport Beach is that we have residential care facility businesses that are being permitted to operate without restriction in residential zones. And so residents are being forced to be located next to very noisy uses and uses that are emitting smoke, which is, as has been recognized by a number of you, as a carcinogen. So really, one of the most important things is to look at the issue of overconcentration, and for this council to be able to say, is the location of these types of businesses appropriate in residential areas? And if so, what kinds of limits should be placed on them? And for the ones that are not appropriate, when are those uses going to be amortized out? Now, you heard from Ms. Oberman about the unique characteristics. I know you've heard a lot about the areas, particularly the impacted areas, about the fact that there's unique characteristics in those areas. The lots are less than 5,000 square feet. You have very narrow streets. There's very limited on-street parking. These have been well-documented impacts, and it's for those reasons that this particular area qualifies for an overlay zone, number one, and number two, it qualifies to have hardwired into your ordinance a specific distance limit to deal with these issues. And the issue of smoking cannot really be understated. Smoking is a carcinogen. Certainly the city can regulate carcinogens that cross property lines and treat them as though a city would treat any other air pollutant issue. With respect to use permits, this is really the grant of special use. These are uses that the city has decided are not uses that are going to be allowed by right. And therefore, there should be a wide range of criteria to help guide good planning decisions. Certainly what's in the ordinance right now is a good start, but there needs to be additional criteria that deal with these specific issues, in addition to hardwiring the 1,000-foot distance into the ordinance. With respect to reasonable accommodations, again, going back to considering and thinking about this in the context of planning, a reasonable accommodation is really a variance to the ordinance conditions. You're giving them special permission to not comply with the law that everybody else needs to comply with. And so when you think about in terms of a variance, there needs to be a consideration as to whether or not this use, and number one, whether the use is appropriate. Number two, whether the property has some kind of unique characteristics that prevent this use from going to other locations, and the fact that there's not other properties that are suitable for this use in other areas. A variance should not be granted just as a matter of convenience or for some type of hardship situation that's been self-created, or to grant some kind of special privilege that isn't granted to other uses. And my last point is really to address the issue of transition and abatement. The inventory that's been talked about should not be a prerequisite to triggering abatement or the requirement to obtain a use permit. There should be no grandfathering of facilities. They either need to get a use permit, or if they're considered to be illegal, those illegal uses need to be abated immediately. And in terms of illegal uses, the uses that are have not been legally established under the existing law should be deemed illegal uses, and those uses need to be abated immediately. And I see my time is up, and I will respect that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Tabor.
I've got
Yes,
a
Councilman
question.
Stallings?
Is there some technical document that the American Planning Association has put out that we could look at?
Yes,
A
there is.
report
and
or something?
We'd be happy to forward that.
Appreciate seeing that.
Our staff has that. Yes.
Okay.
Councilwoman Daigle?
Yes, I did notice your planning background. You previously employed with SCAG.
Yes.
And I was interested, too, if you could provide specific planning-based criteria. You know, we've kind of talked about it in general terms, but what that would look like, I would appreciate.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to submit that to you. Thank you.
Councilwoman Gardner? Oh, your light's on.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Anybody else that wants to speak, come on down. Now's your chance. While the public is Mr. Public's already there. You snuck up on me there, Craig. Go ahead, sorry.
Good evening.
5 minutes,
My name
Craig.
is Craig Batley, and I live on the peninsula and have for the last 6 years. I want to congratulate the council and the new attorneys working on this. You've made a tremendous amount of progress compared to what we've seen in the past. From evidence of the crowd we have tonight, I would recommend that the city council strongly consider another session in December to air comments that are not going to be able to be voiced tonight. I'd like to make a couple points regarding the general plan. I'm going to quote a couple things from the general plan on page 2. Newport Beach has progressed from a small tourist-oriented beach community to a highly desirable residential community. These are all quotes. One of the Southern California's most appealing coastal communities. The general plan recognizes that Newport Beach is primarily a residential community. Our general plan was developed to ensure that the city achieves that vision. How? Creating guidelines that preserve the charm and beauty of our residential neighborhoods, promoting revitalization of older commercial uses like West Newport and Balboa Village. Today, we have an eclectic community of retirees, professionals, young families, students, surfers, vacationers. We also have a large contingent of second homeowners who don't reside in their homes, but they come down and visit. They're usually vacant. We have millions of beachgoers who bring children down to the beach. You've never been to the beach ever, I don't think, in any occasion, and not see a whole bunch of children. They're served by local merchants, shopkeepers, who all love the outdoors. I want to ask the council, if I was before you tonight as a developer, and I have a proposal, I want to have a piece of property that I found here on the peninsula, and I want to rezone it to R4, and I want to establish a residential care facility that's going to house 1,000 beds. And I'm here to apply an application to develop this facility right here in the peninsula. What do you think the answer would be if I even got that far through planning? Wouldn't be allowed. Yet the council, through no regulation whatsoever the last several years, has allowed 1,000 beds of businesses on the peninsula. If it was a formal application to develop one single unit with 1,000 beds, green light would have been probably triggered, been a vote by the population, it would have been turned down. The character and the quality of the neighborhood has been dramatically changed. Why? We no longer know who's living next door. A lot of times people are saying, well, what's the big problem here? Well, if you own a piece of property or you rent a piece of property, you kind of know who your next door neighbor is. They're students, they're surfers, you know their names. They signed a lease. You have direct responsibility to the owner of their property. They're subject to DAX from the police department. You know who they are. When a drug facility establishes a condition next door to you, you don't know who these people are. You don't know who the neighbors are anymore. You don't know where they came from. You don't even know why they're really there. You don't know what the court has ordered them to be there for. You know nothing about your neighbor. I think that's one of the main issues that's before the council. We just don't know who these people occupying these 1,000 beds are. The city has allowed basically a $100 million business industry to enter the neighborhood of the Balboa Peninsula with no regulation, no permits, no licensing, no fees, no taxes being paid. The city is not benefiting one bit from this industry. On one of the major residential treatment businesses' websites, they describe on their website, Newport Beach, one of the most beautiful beach communities in Southern California. We have one of the largest residential substance abuse treatment facilities in the United States operating in our dense residential area. Nowhere does it state in any law that a city has to allow drug and alcohol treatment businesses to saturate a neighborhood, changing its character. Another point has not been mentioned at all that I've even really heard from any source is the failing rate of the program itself. The recidivism rate is very, very high, maybe 50, maybe 60, maybe 70%. If you talk to the probation department, you'll find that most of these programs fail. What happens to all these people when they fall out of the program? Where do they go? A lot of them stay right in the neighborhood.
Okay, Mr. Batley, your time is up.
I urge that we pass the strictest ordinance as possible.
Okay, now we have 3 minutes for public comments for each speaker.
Thank you. Lori Morris, West Newport. I want to start with one of the inconsistencies here. On page 51, you have an exception. If you could look at that. It's an exception, multifamily residential uses and two-family residential uses located in residential districts. That's inconsistent with what the ordinance is supposed to be about. That is a duplex. A two-family, am I incorrect in that? Page 51, under exception. From what I understand, this was new to the people that had been looking at this.
That's original, excuse me.
This is original? I don't know.
That's original language that only applies to the special district zone, so we didn't go around.
So the special district is?
Yeah, it doesn't generally apply in residential areas of the city, only in the special plan community district, the specific plan district. So we didn't try to change.
Okay. I don't know. Okay, so we'll have to, I would like to go over that with you later. While I appreciate the effort, and while I'm not an attorney, I still see some problems. First is, as you look around today, you can see that Sober Living by the Sea has no problem showing up at this meeting to video the residents, yet they never talk. They never get up here before you. They have, I think, maybe once or twice, but never really answered any questions. And they're videoing the residents who are concerned about their neighborhoods. They're here to drive home that they are watching all of us, including all of you. Make no mistake, it is an intimidation tactic they use to stop residents from interfering with their money-making businesses in our neighborhoods. Where have they been for the last year or even 4 years as the residents have come to every meeting, every discussion, worked with the city employees for relief? Where have they been? Hiding. Hoping we will give up because they already know who is on their payroll working on their behalf. The Republican Party leader, Scott Baugh. And boy, are they getting their money's worth. Can't get better help than that. And who are we? We're just residents trying to figure out how our neighborhoods became a prison without walls. As alternative sentencing is touted on their websites and felony drug offenders or even felony assault offenders are brought to our neighborhoods instead of prison. They go free and we are the ones who are punished. Residents of Newport Beach have no problem having our share of recovery homes. What we have a problem with is over-concentrating them in one area, and that's West Newport. The ordinances should not allow unlicensed facilities of any kind, whether it be single operators or integrated facilities, of the numerous countrywide run big operators. We have seen how they have abused this unregulated housing, slamming as many unlicensed businesses into residential neighborhoods as fast as they can. I know others will be getting up here to let you know what they think, but for me, the most important item will be these illegal, non-conforming uses, ones that sound like they're going to be grandfathered and should be abated immediately. These operators know who and where these homes are, and make no mistake, they know how much money is at stake. They will go to any lengths to keep you from protecting our residents and other businesses allowed to, and I don't know what other businesses allowed that kind of latitude in Newport. I'm asking this council, what does this council want to be known for? Protecting its residents or continuing to allow and protect profiteers who prey on the misery of recovering addicts and beleaguered homeowners? Do not let them intimidate you. You have the power to regulate this city's land use. This is not a case of discrimination of a protected class. On the contrary, it's a case of reverse discrimination and a taking of our neighborhoods for their own profit-driven companies. Again, no unlicensed facilities, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morris.
Council member. I'm going to try to make this as quick as I can. Cynthia Kohler, Newport Beach. There's one issue that hasn't been hit on. That is from Sober Living's website. I've been coming before you since 2006 pleading for help, and I found this on their website, and I think the residents, and if you are not aware, need to know this. On their website, under alternative sentencing page, and I quote, "We play an important role in alternative sentencing programs. If you're interested in enrolling in one of our alternative sentencing programs, clearing up your record and not spending time in jail, don't wait, call us today." Under their headline of choosing an attorney, if you are facing criminal charges in Orange County and are interested in seeking alternative sentencing, it is important you choose an attorney who is familiar with the Orange County courts and with many sentencing options available to judges. The Alternatives Program has many distinguished professionals in the legal field, such as criminal defense and family attorneys, bonding companies, and mediators that are able to help resolve your legal troubles and avoid serving time in jail. All of the attorneys and legal professionals that we work with have an excellent rapport with local judges and are very successful at resolving both misdemeanor and felony cases with no jail time served. The Alternatives Program successfully intervened and obtained alternative sentencing for cases involving assault, domestic violence, DUI, possession of a controlled substance, theft, shoplifting, white-collar crime, and their words, much more. Many individuals facing court proceedings are worried about maintaining their confidentiality. The Alternative Program is aware that this issue, and we exercise the utmost discretion when handling clients' cases. We always make certain that our clients' information remains completely confidential. And where are they sending them to? Our neighborhoods. Under the expungement page, it states, and I quote, "In many cases it is possible to have felony convictions reduced to misdemeanors, and then they may be expunged. It is also possible to obtain a certificate of rehabilitation, another way for you to clean their record." Under the defending strike case page, when the current felony that an individual is charged with is a drug offense, it is often possible to convince judges and prosecutors to consider drug diversion or other alternative sentencing options. It is always best to attempt such matters with the aid of qualified legal defense. And where do they send them? To my neighborhood. Under Prop 36, money goes to the county, where it is up to the judges to appoint the offender to the alternative sentencing program of their choice. Our judges. Why are they sending them all to Newport? The ordinances that are written to me are unacceptable. We need a 1,000-foot separation. We need no unlicensed facilities of any kind. Immediate abatement of these illegal uses. We need no grandfathering to address the overconcentration that we're already dealing with. We need to bring the level back to pre-2004 when the ordinances were changed. What you talked about, Mr. Markman, with the CUP, it puts the burden back on the residents, which we've already been dealing with for how long? Tonight, you've been charged with this momentum task because of the tremendous errant judgment made by the City Council in 2004 when they changed the code and removed the CUP, which allowed the taking of our neighborhoods by these businesses and their clients. None of the residents are against anyone who truly wants to recover. I'm sure we've all had somebody in our family or a friend who has struggled with the difficult issue of addiction. I know I have. What we are against is the overconcentration of these homes and the taking and blighting of our neighborhoods at the expense of the residents and the bad fortune of the clients they serve. The residents are now prisoners in our own homes, and we are the ones serving the time. This is a prison city without walls, serving 1,000 beds at the city's latest estimate. I urge the council to be recognized. I urge this council to be recognized for doing the right thing for all people they serve and change the points being made here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kohler.
My name is Max Liskin. I live on the Balboa Peninsula. And I've always thought that you should treat people the way you want to be treated. And in that spirit, when I've come and spoken before the council, several times I've invited the sober living facilities and CRC specifically to speak, to try to come to some type of agreement in good faith. And I think tonight, when the mayor, in good faith, asked if the sober living operators wanted to speak, the silence was deafening. And to me, that speaks volumes. I've been in business, I'm retired now, but what I learned to do in business was to look at my customer and also to look at the other side and see what motivates them. In doing that, I started in 2 companies and sold them both to public companies. And that was pretty difficult, but I did it. And what I learned about it is companies like CRC, which are private and have stated that they want to go public when talking to analysts because they have about $600 million of debt, is they talk about growth. So what I've come to the conclusion is if we can't get them to listen to what our needs, we should speak to their needs, and their need is growth. And that's what we have to stop, because if they can't grow in our community, they're going to try to grow somewhere else. And they need to grow in order to support their debt load. They have grown. In the last year, if you look at their 10Q, which is their recent financial statement, which I have for the record, number one, in about a 40-page document, the vast majority is purely financial. It doesn't speak about its people it serves. It talks to things like forward-looking statements, attempts by local residents to force our closure or relocation, the limited number of national suppliers of methadone used in CRCs. These are things that can limit their growth. The failure to maintain established relationships or cultivate new relationships with patient referral sources. Competition that limits CRC's ability to grow. Well, they have grown. In the last year, if you look at their performance, the number here is that they've grown at an 87% growth rate. And what they've done in terms of residential treatment is they operate 31 inpatient and 15 outpatient facilities in 12 states. I don't know how many that is here, but it's a significant percentage. So I've never been sued. I've never sued anyone. But I'm never scared of a fight. And we got to stop the growth, because we live here. It's our home. You guys have done everything you can do. And they sit there and record us and go back to Boston, where it's Bain Capital with billions of dollars, and figure, oh, we'll just have litigation. I'm ready to fight. I'm not going to fight you. I'll fight them. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liskner.
Kudos to those of you that actually walked the area and saw what happens, especially on the peninsula, but all over Newport.
Can you give us your name, sir? Your name for the record,
Oh, I'm
please?
Shelley Dopkins.
Thank you.
I walked here. I'm very fortunate to live about a mile from here. What does that have to do with the issue here? Under the proposal, we're recommending that these rehab houses be 1,000 feet apart. It took me 20 minutes to get here. I would have passed 5 of them on my way. That's a visual. That's me. Suppose it was a mother and child, or somebody who's handicapped, or whatever. But the point is that they're exposed to the smoking, the traffic, the garbage, and we just heard the criminals, 1 every 4 minutes for a 1-mile walk. Enough of the visual. By the way, Long Beach is also suffering the same controversy as Newport Beach. This is a recent paper from them, and it says, six-pack rumors in Naples. That's what they call these places, six-packs, because of the 6 people and under or over, licensed or unlicensed. And then we didn't become too popular. We also made the paper saying the number of six-pack facilities has boomed in recent years, particularly in some coastal cities. There are 100 in Newport Beach, where the homes have been very controversial. That's an understatement. So Long Beach is suffering. Other communities are suffering. The point that I'm making is that you have allies in other cities all over California. Please act on January 8th. Don't further degrade our family life, our neighborhoods, our community, and our city. Don't further degrade it. You have a chance to stop it and reverse the process. By the way, for the legal counsel, putting that 1,000-foot limitation, that's paragraph 20.91A.050 A to F in the papers there. Please include that. It's very critical. Every 1,000 feet is more than enough. The last point that I'd like to make is that ADA has the reasonable accommodation that's been referred to a number of times here. But don't forget the other side of reasonable accommodation, which is also in Americans with Disability Act, and that is undue hardship. You have seen so many people in front of you showing the undue hardship that it has caused by having these group homes with you. You're on solid ground to act on January 8th. Please do so.
Thank you, sir.
Bob Rush. This is a good first effort. Thank you. We have a lot of work to do, though. We have a lot of work because we still are unable to see the problem. The problem over the last 3 or 4 years has not been that anybody in Newport has been discriminatory. The problem is that Newport, the city, has been largely reversely discriminatory, actually stripping away community rights to the point where we are lesser citizens than our counterparts in the rehab homes. But what concerns me is that we've hired Richards, Watson, and Gershon to assist us to get out of this dilemma caused by errantly removing the conditional use permit in '04. To get us out of this dilemma, Richards, Watson, and Gershon have been hired to assist us in this writing. Yet we still have the problem. Mr. Markman, you mentioned initially that we're walking a delicate balance between, how did you put it, avoiding discriminatory actions while maintaining the integrity of our neighborhoods, I think, if I may summarize. I live on River Avenue. I've lived there for about, probably all told, probably about 10 years. I have, effectively on my street, I probably have probably somewhere in the vicinity of 14 to 18 facilities. And within 5 blocks of my house, probably 20 or somewhere thereabouts. They all sprung up, with the exception of one house, two facilities. They all sprung up post-2004. And now we're here in 2007 to correct that, essentially. And they sprung up because we errantly removed the conditional use review. But in your first draft, you identify, and I'm going to identify reverse discrimination here, what the problem is. And I'll use one example. It's on page 52, item C, paragraph 1. It says, in the extension of an abatement period for a nonconforming use, that is, when a rehab is found to be nonconforming and we're going to abate it, a property owner may request an extension of the abatement period to amortize the property owner's investment to avoid an unconstitutional taking of that property. Where is my remedy to file an anti-extension motion because of my property's been taken in the several years that precipitated this overconcentration? I mean, I've been in River Avenue has been overconcentrated for quite a while now, and West Newport's been overconcentrated, but where is my right? So you're saying essentially in this paragraph that a property owner who's renting to a rehab has the right to file for an extension so that we don't cut his lease short and we effectively take his property. Yet my property's been taken for a number of years, and I have no right to counter this measure. And that's a prima facie example of reverse discrimination. I am a lesser citizen than this particular owner who's leasing to a rehab. I am a lesser citizen than this person that's leasing to a rehab. Am I getting this wrong here? Please, I'm not being sarcastic, I'm just asking. Do I have this wrong? Is my understanding wrong?
Okay, Mr. Rush, your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond to his comment, or? Okay, well, Mr. Markman's going to sum up, I think, at the end here, so we have a.
Mayor Rosansky, members of the City Council, my name is David Obaj, and I want to thank you for taking the time to address this tonight. I'm here to represent Casa San Miguel Homeowners Association and also Casa Santa Rosa Homeowners Association in Newport Heights. Our two homeowners associations have contacted the City of Newport Beach numerous times through letters, code enforcement meetings, and City Council meetings regarding the intended use of 3 adjacent residential properties located at the corner of Clay Street and Orange Avenue in Newport Heights. This communication started in 2004 by our association and many of our neighbors. These complaints were blatantly ignored by the city officials in Newport Beach. The owner of these properties has been operating an integrated 3-building boarding house facility since 2006. If the city would have reacted to this situation at the time, we would not be faced with the mess we're in now. The corner of Clay and Orange in Newport Heights has now become a 3-building compound with over 30 occupants. It used to be 2 houses with 2 families. Our neighbors contacted the owner, and he told them he was just renting rooms. Don't worry about it. I'm not operating a drug and alcohol group recovery home. Oh, okay. On the morning of November 6, 2007, an officer from the Orange County Sheriff's Department came to my house and all the houses in our neighborhood looking for information about a resident from 3309 Clay Street. This individual was being sought by law enforcement for misdemeanor and felony drug-related charges. The officer also informed us that these suspects are elusive and hard to find because they move from house to house within the drug and alcohol group network in Newport Beach. This is a scam. This triplex of boarding houses is located 1 block from our local nursery school. The city should not allow facilities that do not require background checks on the occupants. Newport Beach Councilman Leslie Daigle was quoted in the Daily Pilot on November 4, 2007, that Newport Beach does not allow boarding houses in our residential zones. Well, if that is accurate, then why has the City of Newport Beach permitted this owner to operate 3 boarding houses? This owner is operating boarding houses which are masquerading as sober living facilities. Where is the city's regulation of these activities? In addition, we have just learned that this owner recently transferred the operation of this facility to Morningside Recovery, which is now a direct violation of the moratorium of group homes which has been implemented by the City of Newport Beach City Council. I am here tonight for a lot of residents in Newport Heights. We are extremely concerned about this situation, and we're tired of a city government that has not been willing to regulate the activity of these unscrupulous landlords. This situation is a serious threat to our community, and I want to tell you something. It was always my dream to live in Newport Beach, and that dream is eroding quickly because of what's happening here. The character and social fabric of our residential neighborhoods are being damaged by the activities of these boarding houses and alcohol and drug recovery homes. I appreciate you letting me talk to you about this tonight. It's not just happening on the peninsula. It's now happening in Corona Del Mar, and my friends in Corona Del Mar are now concerned about it, and it's spreading. I'm just asking you, please protect our neighborhood. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Assistant City Manager Kift, you have something?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and council members, you will recall that in early October, you authorized one of 2 lawsuits in violation of the moratorium, and one of those is against the home that this gentleman spoke to her.
Thank you. Sir.
Mayor and council members, my name is Robert Hawley. I represent Wasserman Real Estate. We own the office building at 3355 Violito, which is commonly known as California Beach Building. We are in a different but a related situation. The general plan has designated the property as multifamily residential. We are operating the property as office and plan on putting millions of dollars into the property to improve it. Under the circumstances, we potentially could have that property abated because of we are a legal non-conforming use, but under the wording that I see here, we potentially could have to tear that building down. And under the circumstances of planning on putting a lot of money into the building, we are in no position to move forward with improving that building under the circumstances because it's just too risky. So my request is to revise the wording to protect us so that we can continue to use that building and improve that building as an office use.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Members of the council, I'm Willis Longyear. I live on Lido Isle. I was conversing with a friend of mine who's in the rehab business. She inspects rehab facilities and for an association that is concerned with that. She sent me an email. She says, I share your concern. Those homes that do not have managers that meet this standard, certified addiction treatment specialist, a minimum of 2 years college degree, a minimum of 2 years clean and sober, should not be allowed to operate. What I think is happening in Newport Beach is that you have a bunch of young kids managing those group homes, and these kids are fresh off drugs and alcohol themselves. They have no education or training in the field of addiction, no management experience, and they are allowing the neighborhood to become completely out of control. If the group home managers had to meet the 3 criteria above, and they were also members of the Orange County Sober Living Home Coalition, and thus more closely regulated, then Newport Beach would not have nearly so many group homes. So if all the group homes in Newport Beach that did not have proper management and are not members of the Orange County Sober Living Home Coalition were closed down, over 98% of those homes would be closed. I share your concern. And it's too bad that there are so many greedy, sober living home operators in Newport Beach that just keep packing people in regardless of the damage that this is doing to not only the neighborhoods, but to the reputation of sober living homes in Orange County, that we are trying to do the right thing. I think this is an outside view of our city that's being provided by somebody who lives somewhere else, and this is what our reputation is becoming. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, Councilman Henn.
A quick question driving out of that comment for Mr. Markman. I believe it's the case that the present ordinance that we're proposing here requires an operator who does get somehow an approval of the CUP, it requires them to obtain a certification from a responsible organization such as was just described in order to get a CUP.
That's
to the extent that they aren't already licensed by the state of California.
That's right. Any
They have
operator.
to get a certification from a responsible managing organization.
Yes, and the organization is actually named in the ordinance.
Very good, thank you.
Council members and staff, my name is Laura Curran. I live in Corona Del Mar, and I'd like to speak to the issue specifically of parking regulation. There are many properties in R2 and R2 units that only have 1 parking space per unit. In fact, the council is aware of this because in 2005, I attended several hearings where the ordinance was changed to end condo conversions if only 1 parking space per unit could be provided. So I would like to see the proposed ordinance also include the requirement that any application for a new use for a condo for a 6 and under licensed or unlicensed also require that the property have the same amount of parking that someone building a new home or a new business would have to have for that property. That would be complying with the spirit of the law as well as the letter of the law. Some of the operators who intend to operate in Corona Del Mar have indicated that they believe there's sufficient parking because the parking will be on the side streets. They do not see having only 1 parking space as a barrier. They see the streets as the place for parking. So again, council took this issue up in 2005, and after much debate, came down clearly on the side of residents needing to provide 2 parking spaces per unit in the R2 zones, and I believe it's fair and the intent of council to have the same amount of parking provided for any group home. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
My name is Joel Slutsky. I certainly agree with the last point, but I came up for really only to make one point, and that's the 1,000 feet. I attended all the planning commission meetings, and this was discussed extensively. It was discussed by the legal counsel that preceded Mr. Markham. I might have butchered your last name there, Sir Markham. They talked about different cities. They talked about different situations. I sat for many debates on ranging from 75 feet to 1,000 feet. After really looking at that issue for a long period of time, the Planning Commission said, we will recommend 1,000 feet. There was one exception on the Planning Commission. I said he was going to put a caveat in there because he was concerned about lawsuits and what have you. But the Planning Commission, as a body, said, we need 1,000 feet. Now it's to you, and all of a sudden 1,000 feet has disappeared. Well, I shouldn't say you, it's to the new legal counsel. I really strongly urge that we go back. They had the guts to say, we've looked at everything, this is what we think is right. I'm asking you to have the same attitude towards it.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're past the time for our study session. Is there anybody else that wanted to talk? Or okay, I'm going to close public comments. Sorry, Jim. You can talk to me privately. I'm going to close public comments. I believe Mr. Markman wanted to kind of wrap up a little bit his presentation.
Right. I started out by saying that we wanted direction from the council, and there are a lot of issues that were raised, but I want to hone in on the two biggest items that we have not recommended that you've heard several people ask for tonight. Let me go back to our goal and our direction from the council. We want to have an ordinance that will cause the changes sought by everybody who spoke this evening. We want one that will be valid, that we can represent to the council, that is not only defensible, but in all likelihood we will be able to preserve and have operate. We don't want to recommend an ordinance that we think will be subject to injunction by the federal courts or is facially discriminatory. And the way I said it was, as far as future people, there's a possibility they could generate new operations, but only in the MFR zone with a use permit, which most people have recognized as what might have happened in 2003 to prevent the present situation. We also wanted to say that nobody could leave this room looking at this ordinance on its face and say, I am out of business. And a whole lot of other people like me are out of business, and therefore a lot of people in recovery programs in Newport Beach theoretically will not be allowed to continue to do so. That is facial discrimination. And to be blunt and candid with everybody in this room who wants 1,000-foot or a disbursement standard in this ordinance, every time someone has attempted to do a disbursement standard without looking at any particular situation and applied it to this type of uses, consistently the federal courts have struck down those ordinances as facially discriminatory. In my view, that they would do so also in Newport Beach, were you to adopt such a standard as a hard-wired standard in the ordinance. I can't recommend that. I think all you're going to do is delay having any impact on the situation while that gets litigated, and I think the prospects for litigating that, I never give up, by the way. I like the gentleman who said, well, we want to fight. We want to fight on a basis that we can recommend to the council would be successful. And I can't recommend that. It's been tried more than once and has never succeeded. Now, having said that, we do have standards that have a basis, the American Planning Association standard. In the context of the CUP, we have recommended application of that. We can also recommend working on that further so that the final ordinance might take into consideration the 300-foot blocks that you have in the substandard zone area rather than 600-foot blocks you have everywhere else, so that that standard is applied even-handedly depending on the situation. So in the context of a hearing officer looking at use permits, suggesting standards, call them disbursement standards, call them standards for how many of these operations can occur on a given block or a given length of street, we're happy to plug that into the use permit process so that the hearing officer takes it into consideration, understands these are standards recognized by the council, but do not tie that hearing officer's hands in dealing with a particular situation because that standard might not make sense. And I can give you an example. I mean, if you say you want somebody, like Mr. Rush came up and said there are 6 or 7 of these operations within proximity of his house. So if you say there's a 1,000-foot standard hardwired in the ordinance, even if you put that, hardwired it in and said, hearing officer, you have to adhere to this, okay, which one of these 7 uses, all within 1,000 feet of each other, survives? What criteria do you have? Well, you're right back to the criteria that would best serve the neighborhood as far as we're concerned. So these numbers, these so many linear feet sound great, but in operation, I'm happy to talk about the 1 or 2 per block, the 600-foot block, the 300-foot block being treated differently in the substandard zone, but I cannot recommend the council simply adopt an ordinance saying all present uses or any uses of this nature have to be 1,000 feet away from each other, because I don't think it's going to survive, and I don't think if it did survive, it would be practical to apply it to 100 or more uses that are already here. So I'm just, as a matter of prudence, can't take you down that road. I can't tell the council what to do, but we cannot recommend going down that road. Similarly, while we agree the problem needs to be addressed and treated, Ms. Oberman said you should set a goal of, after a certain amount of time, ending up with so many beds compared to, let's say, a quarter of the beds that are here now. We can't recommend that either, because essentially you will have adopted an ordinance that says 3/4 of the present recovery facilities in Newport Beach have to disappear in 3 years. And then you dive into a CUP process, and the courts are going to say that's a facial discrimination, in our view. If we could recommend that, we would. We can't recommend it. If the council wants to go down that road, having said that, we defend that position, but it's not a position we can recommend. If it was, it would have been in the ordinance in the first place. I've had a number of conversations with Ms. Overman, Mr. Titus, and others about these standards and why we won't go there. These standards in the context of use permit processes, other administrative processes are fine if they're worked in and there's some logic behind them. That's what we've tried to do. We've tried to incorporate that disbursement notion, but based on some logic and on a process where they can be applied or not applied by the hearing officer. So those are, I think, the most important things. CEQA applies to use permits, as you know. It's an entitlement process. Whether it applies to any particular process, we don't know, because basically the test case or the present condition is the operation's already there. So if all it's doing is seeking to continue, I'm not sure how to make that call on CEQA, but it does apply. Remember, it's a two-edged sword, because if you do a CEQA process in a use permit context and you want to do a negative declaration or an EIR, that's going to add a lot of time to that process, and while that time is added, that use goes on. So it's a two-edged sword from that point of view. But it does apply, as Mr. Titus says, as a matter of law it applies. The public hearing Mr. Titus mentioned is specifically required to be noticed. It will be noticed. They will be open public hearings. If they're staffed by our office, from the staff point of view, whatever the staff may be recommending, one citizen was right. We will be soliciting the aid of all the people impacted by that particular use to come forward and give declarations and provide evidence if they oppose the use permit being issued to that use, because that's the only way we can get there from here. What is grandfathered? The only uses that are grandfathered by the ordinance we've written are the uses that are made non-conforming by the adoption of this ordinance. We have not grandfathered anything else that may have been grandfathered already or not grandfathered. And finally, the question of taking, God, I hate to be legally technical in answering a question, but I have to be in answering Mr. Rush's question. We did not write those sections of your amortization period for nonconforming uses. Those have been in your ordinance a long time, as well as in every other ordinance I probably ever looked at for a city. And the reason why you want to have a stopgap saying you can't throw somebody else out if it's unconstitutional, the difference here is if the government acts affirmatively, takes an action, an abatement action, that is essentially doesn't take into account the amortization of the investment, then that's unconstitutional. That's potentially a taking of property by a governmental entity. That is compensable. And while Mr. Rush and a whole lot of other people may feel like these private activities that have occurred because there hasn't been legislation requiring their regulation to the extent they would like, is in essence a taking of their property. It's not a governmental affirmative action that has caused a diminution in the value of their property. So there is a legal distinction from what he's talking about, which I'm sure is very real, and what's in the ordinance, which is a legal mechanism to allow the city to avoid being sued for damages. Those are two different things. So, and I realize people are very upset and file claims on the basis of lack of legislative regulation. I'm not really aware of any legal authority that would cause the city to have to pay such a claim. But if you act affirmatively to deprive people of their property or diminish the value, then there are plenty of cases available to seek damages. So all in all, I hope everybody understands we are trying to produce a product and recommend to the council a product that will, in fact, practically change the situation. We don't believe that all of these operators will apply for a use permit. We don't believe that all of them, or even a substantial number of them, necessarily will have issued to them a use permit. We are requiring things that most of these operations supposedly don't have, like operators that are certified by the nonprofit organizations in Orange County that certify people who supervise or give services in recovery facilities, and almost every upgrade kind of condition we could think of for those who want to try to survive through the use permit process. We don't think all of them will. We think some of them will, and some of them will be have a history when the residents come forward that will be a basis for denial. And we think it can happen very quickly depending on how the council wants to man this operation. That is, how many lawyers you want working for you, how much money you want to spend on hearing officers, how fast can you process the applications that do come forward. We think that you'll get a faster relief and a better result with what we're recommending than doing a disbursement provision or a straight-ahead goal of eradicating X percentage of these uses. We think those are, if not doomed to failure, they're doomed to be tied up in litigation for a long time.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilwoman Gardner.
When we began the process, I know you said something that was, to me, made a great deal of sense, and I don't want to say it wrong. But it was, if we construct this wrong, we're going to get slapped so fast with some kind of injunction that we will have proliferation because we won't have anything in effect at that point.
You'll have what you have now, which is nothing. If this ordinance is enjoined from being applied, all you have left to yourself is the situation that now exists, which everybody obviously can't live with.
Right. Where if we did something judicial, we could still accomplish what we want, maybe not as dramatically, but without the fear.
I'm not sure that it won't be rather dramatic. We'll just have to see 90 days. What do we say, May 22nd? How many applications are on file compared to how many uses have been enumerated here today, and what percentage didn't even apply because they know that they can't get this use permit and operate in accordance with the conditions that are going to be put on them, which I think are going to be a whole lot of them. If they're not, they're not, but I think it will be a whole lot of them. If this is going too slowly and it's glacial and the citizens aren't getting a result, they can ask to step it up and maybe take another approach that's facial and hope that we can justify it because, A, we're offering reasonable accommodation, and B, you have an existing situation that maybe we can try to distinguish from the other cases. But we still think what we're recommending today will get you the best result and the quickest result. If we didn't believe that, we wouldn't be recommending it. We're not here to try to, find safe harbor.
I'd like to have at least response on the one
No,
issue.
Mr. Titus, this is not the time. Councilman
The
Henry.
neighbors here spend a lot of time
Mr.
and effort.
Titus, this is not the time. The public comment section is closed.
I understand.
Please sit down, sir. Please sit down, sir.
I understand, but the neighbors really would like to have an opportunity
Please
after a
sit
year
down,
of this.
sir. Thank you. Councilman Henn.
Okay.
I would like to explore this issue a little further about the practical differences. It's been suggested that a better way to approach this is a sort of the clean sweep approach, if you will, that we could bar all existing as well as new in R1, 1.5, and 2, and therefore subject them to an immediate abatement or a near immediate abatement situation. Let's set aside for the moment whether or not that would be immediately challenged on the basis of facial discrimination. And let's assume that the city, frankly, for my purposes, I do not want to wait for the residents to ask us to move fast on this. Whichever way we go, I don't want to wait for somebody to ask us to move fast. Let's assume that we pass these ordinances essentially as they are, and that we have a phalanx of hearing judges available. We have the city staff available if we have to have temporary staff available to provide support for the administrative process here. What is the practical difference in timing as between that circumstance in terms of achieving a result here, as between that circumstance and the clean sweep approach where people go into abatement, recognizing that they still have other remedies associated with it? I'd like to hear you talk about that.
Okay, let's follow that thought. Let's start out with, you already understand the process, the timing of the process we think we're suggesting, which would go forward, and you would see what you have to deal with in late May, assuming that we can stave off any attempt to join even this ordinance, because there will be creative lawyers trying to stop the application of this ordinance. So you're in the CUP process. That's a process, if you get enough effort into it, we can probably conclude in 6 to 9 months for every, if you want to put that kind of effort in. So let's say you didn't do that. You're still leaving the people subject to abatement with a facial challenge, a challenge to the ordinance because it's facially discriminatory. And even if that doesn't get it enjoined, the same people that you're trying to abate who want to fight, or want to stay in business, will have the reasonable accommodation process available to them. And then if they think they can show that they have an investment that is entitled to amortization, they have that process available to them. So what you've achieved in taking that risk, if I can put it that way, is just taking out the CUP process, which somebody might survive, and you're also theoretically taking out the possibility they could get a CUP issued. Let's also think about if you wanted to do a rollback, just a straight ahead, I don't care if you're an existing use or not, subject to reasonable accommodation and amortization, you're out if you're unlicensed. I think that's what was suggested. You have to have some criteria. You can't just say 2/3 of you are out. You're going to have to designate who's out. So what I heard some people suggest is all unlicensed are out. They're just out. Yeah. Which, so every person operating one of these and every person receiving treatment has been singled out on the face of an ordinance to disappear. And I think that's well, people in this room would like to close their eyes and hope that happened. A, I don't think it's going to happen. And B, the only thing you've changed is you didn't have a use permit process to support that happening, which completely changes the legal landscape so that the practical test applied to the use permit process is very, very favorable to it being succeeding, whereas a legal test applicable to a sweep out by ordinance is very, very difficult to meet. In fact, you're going to be hard-pressed to find a case in the Ninth Circuit where it has been met. So that's the council's choice. I'm not here to denigrate anybody's feelings about this. I have worked very hard with, I think, both sides of this equation, particularly with concerned citizens. I perfectly understand where they're coming from. They understand where I'm coming from. I'm here to recommend something I think will work and will stand legal test, and that's why we're recommending this approach.
Okay. Any further questions, Mike?
Well, it's not clear to me that how appropriate this is, but I think it would be appropriate to hear from Mr. Titus to the extent that he wishes to comment on. I would like to hear from Mr. Titus as it relates to the comments that Mr. Markman just made.
All right, what's the pleasure of the council? Would you like to hear from Mr. Titus at this point in time? Okay, how much time do we want to give Mr. Titus to?
I'm hoping not more than 5 minutes. We're
5 minutes, Mr. Titus.
It won't be 5 minutes. I'd like to focus in on the 1,000-foot separation. Your council mentioned hardwiring it so there's no discretion. That's not what we asked for. What we said was, the APA sets a standard of 1 block. What is a block? We say a block is 900 feet. If the hearing officer decides that a block is more, in this particular instance, you need more separation. Say, for example, it's an alcohol treatment facility housing 30 recovering alcoholics, and it's within, say, 1,500 feet of 5 bars. I think the hearing officer could say, it should be 1,500 feet, not 1,000. We're not saying the hearing officer is limited to 1,000. What we're saying is that should be a criteria that the hearing officer can apply, which is good planning principles, similar to, example, 1 block under the APA. In addition, the unlicensed. I think that going through the CP process, they have to get its certification from Orange County, or they have to be licensed, or they're out. Because we have a situation where facilities are not treating the disabled appropriately. So we have an opportunity here to meet our fair share in the community, which we are doing. And we were asking that they be facilities that are licensed or certified, and we want to make sure that that's part of the provisions. Those are the 2 points I wanted to make. And I think if your counsel can speak, I think he'll say those are perfectly legal ways of dealing with it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. My understanding is that that provision is in the ordinance, that we are requiring
Yes.
certification.
And if we're, again, I'm speaking across people instead of to them. I heard, when Mr. Titus says is acceptable, I have other ideas about the number that he wants. The block is fine. The number, I think I could work with him between now and the time we presented an ordinance and fit that in. We both agree that if he agrees with me that this is a suggestion or a standard, a default standard, the council suggesting the hearing officer can deviate depending on the circumstances, that's fine. I mean, that's what we're suggesting. It falls into the whole process that we suggested. And if Mr. Titus and the people he represents are comfortable with that, we're comfortable with each other. We don't have a problem. I was just talking about an ordinance that said these will all be 1,000 feet from each other, the end, and nobody looks at it, there's no hearing. That's what I was referring to, not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is acceptable, and he and I have gone through many rounds kind of refining this discussion. And in the overlay zone, as I've indicated, I don't think the use of the word block is fair in the context of what a block is in Newport Beach. And I'm happy to continue to work with them on that, to come back hopefully with something that they could get behind when we present the ordinance. The council wants to instruct us to work on that issue, we'll do it. But I was speaking to the whole approach, which is an administrative approach, not an ordinance sweep out.
Councilman Henn?
Just one further comment on that point then. I would suggest the following, and I would hope we have consensus amongst the council for this, that we look at what a typical or standard block size is in the standard planning areas of the city. In other words, excluding the non-standard areas of the city. And I wouldn't start that process with a number in mind. I'd look and see what's typical. And I'd like to see what a range of potential reasonable outcome, not just a number, but a range of outcome that would be defensible and rational associated with that activity.
Right. Actually, we drilled a lot into that today. We'll hold that number until we come back so we can discuss it with interested parties.
Such that, just to be clear, such that that would be the standard that could be in the ordinance as a default standard as it applies to the non-standard subdivision areas as well.
That's right.
That number turns out to be 600 or 800 or 900 or 1,000. It would apply to the non-standard subdivision as a sort of a de facto definition of what a block is.
And that's fine, and I agree that the hearing officer can extend a greater spatial standard if that's what makes sense when he hears the ordinance, or he can do something different. And that's what we've suggested right along, and we think that's the legal test for attacking that ordinance or that process is very favorable to getting the results the residents want. And that's why we're suggesting it.
All right, with that comment, I will we'll end this agenda item. Our last thing is public comments on non-agenda items.
Can we get a direction from the council?
I think you have our direction, Jim.
Okay.
Public comments on non-agenda items. Okay, seeing no one. Hurry up, sir.
W.R. Dilding, live on the Balboa Peninsula. Mr. Mayor, you did not ask for oral input on Roman numeral 2, item 2. This is on the alternate bid procedures.
I'm sorry, on the what?
On the alternate bid procedures on Oasis.
Oh, you're absolutely right. So why don't
I'm not going to make it
we can
short.
cover it now.
When I heard Steve read about design build, I had a heart attack.
Excuse me,
I
sir.
thought,
Could you folks please leave quietly? We're trying to continue our hearing.
I'm going to be nice.
Please leave quietly. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
When I heard Steve mention design build, my heart started to flutter. Some time ago, when you were in the City Hall process using design bid, I challenged your legal authority to use design build. At that time, then Mayor Heffron told me I would get a response from the city, of which I never formally did. I did have a talk with the city attorney, explained to me, you do not have a statute to use design build. It is an alternative. The county of Santa Barbara, County of Orange, just this past year, are authorized to use design build. The requirements to use design build are ridiculous. I have served on a state commission, the only commission in the public contract code, which all public works projects are covered under since 1984. One of the things I would like to just share with you, I see when you're talking about the, the program manager at risk, of the three, you might want to talk to a couple of the school districts. I forget which one in Huntington Beach that terminated one of the individuals' agreement. I also served with one of the individuals on the commission and appointed by the governor, and I have no respect for the man's operations. One of the things in this risk manager, he's going out there and guaranteeing you a price at the time the design concept is completed. Where are the working drawings? What's it really going to cost? So he's putting a hedge in there that if there is additional cost, he's got to cover them. Yes, in the long run, if it's a simple little project, fine. But from what I saw, the rendering of this Oasis Center, man, there's a lot of infrastructure. That's a very complicated project. I can see trouble. The other thing is that if you're going out for typically 20-plus subcontractors involved in a project such as this, if you're going to go out to bid every time with the requirements of the state, which I'm not going to pursue further, this city, as a charter city, does not comply with the state requirements. I agree with what the city does. At the same time, you're not complying. It's expensive. I think at this time, your best bet is to go as originally proposed, and that would be the design, bid, and build. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else want to speak on a non-agenda item?
Yes, go ahead. I've never had an opportunity to meet with you. I've met with...
Can we have your name, ma'am?
Sharon Moulton. I represent a company called Harry International. We're program and construction managers. We're ranked 7th in the country nationally. Principals of our firm were founders of the Construction Management Association. We've done every type of public building you can imagine, from community centers to city halls and parks. And I just wanted to have a chance to be considered, our firm to be considered. We were the construction managers on Irvine City Hall's Civic Center and Public Safety Facility. We've represented Beverly Hills, and we also have an arm of our company called Balfour Beatty Capital. It's a British firm. That's our parent. And we provide public-private funding to public projects. So, if this is something that you're interested in exploring, we would love an opportunity to share some thoughts with you. So here's another one.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay? Thanks.
I might want to, after the meeting or next day, talk to Mr. Batum now. He's our public
I
works
believe we
director.
have they're on our list.
Very good. Thank you, Steve. Anybody else that wants to speak on a non-agenda item?
Hello. My name is John Roth. I live in Corona Del Mar. And I'm wondering if there's some way that we could either cut down or remove the number of fire pits in the Corona Del Mar beach area.
We did cut down a bit.
Yeah, we did, and the states, we're in trouble with them now.
But one, we are having a meeting soon, looking at some of these issues, and we did, as far as air quality, with the new fire standards, there are some times at least when we might be able to abate them, but the Coastal Commission is standing in front of us with a requirement that we have a certain number at this point.
We have beach facilities that are much more accommodating to the kind of volume of people associated with the barbecue and that sort of thing. And that area, the beach, in my opinion, is too small for that much accommodation. It is strictly standing room only on holidays, and I think that defeats the purpose of the park. But, I don't have the power to change that. I'm just here to request that you consider cutting down that volume.
Okay, thank you, sir. As Councilwoman Gardner mentioned, we are looking at the problem. We're kind of in trouble already with the Coastal Commission with the few pits that we didn't replace after the beach was reworked, and your comments are noted, and
Okay.
we're doing the best we can.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? Public comment on non-agenda items? Seeing no one, we're adjourned till 7 o'clock.